Okay, right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for our scrutiny meeting this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, although I think you all should by now, I'm Emily Sproul, I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner. Should we do some introductions, Jeannie?
Hello, I'm Jeannie Bell, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Hello, I'm John Wise. I'm the Independent Scrutiny Advisor.
Hi everyone, I'm BC Osundiko, Independent Scrutiny Advisor. Thank you.
Hi, John Riley, Chief Finance Officer for Police and Crime Commissioner.
Afternoon, Sue McTaggart, Chief Executive, Police and Crime Commissioner.
Kim Dawson, Scrutiny and Improvement Officer at the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner.
Harvey McGregor, Public Affairs and Research Assistant to the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm James Lation, Head of Business Services and Assurance for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Fiona Smith. I'm Head of Performance and Analytics for Merseyside Police. Good afternoon, everyone. Shirley Jones, Head of CSD Merseyside Police. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jennifer Wilson, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable, Merseyside Police.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Green, Deputy Chief Constable.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Kameen, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable for Investigations.
Good afternoon, Paul White, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable, responsible for Matrix and Response and Resolution.
Good afternoon, Assistant Chief Constable Jenny Sims, People Services.
Good afternoon, Keith Dickinson, Director of Resources, Merseyside Police.
Great, thank you. And we are expecting the Chief as well. I know she's on her way, so she'll join us in a few minutes shortly. Okay, so minutes then. Minutes from the last meeting. Those who were there, everyone happy? They're an accurate record? Yeah? No queries or anything on those? Okay, thank you. And then in terms of actions, there's only one action still on the tracker, which we're going to get an update from, I think, in March. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, Commissioner, that will come back in March, as previously agreed.
So that was just around the additional vetting check, so we'll come back to that one in March, so that's fine. Right, so we're going to move on then to do emerging issues. So again, for those of you who maybe this is your first time attending or watching the meeting, we like to just reflect on anything that's happened since the last time we met and just give the police an opportunity to comment on some of the actions or activities that's been going on. So the first one that we wanted just to pick up on was around Operation Tarlac, which is obviously this is the national response to the ongoing Israel and Palestine conflict, and not asking you to comment on the geopolitics, but in terms of how we're managing protests in particular, but also activity around hate crime and things like that. Is that Jenny?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll update. So, as you've alluded to, the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues. Nationally, the operation is known as Operation Tarlac, but locally it's known as Operation Tate. And as you can expect, we have implemented a raft of activity to make sure that we are supporting our communities and staff throughout this period of time. I've taken the role of Goal Command, which involves maintaining stakeholder briefings, but at a tactical level, we have Chief Superintendent Zoe Thornton, who has been chairing a programme of work involving all of our partners across the local authority areas, including the Community Security Trust and other faith networks. We have undertaken weekly monitoring of hate crimes and conflict-related hate crimes, and have a regular scanning process in place to monitor information and intelligence that really helps us to understand how the conflict is manifesting itself in terms of the impact upon our local communities. We've worked extremely hard to listen to our communities and provide reassurance, and I'll touch on some of the activity that we've undertaken to deliver that shortly. As you would expect, we've started a community impact assessment, which is being maintained by the Community Engagement Unit, and have ensured that we have provided additional attention to Jewish places of worship, amongst other places of worship, recognising the impact upon all of our communities. If we could just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. As I've alluded to, lots of reassurance providers with the synagogues and our Jewish community, but similar work has also been ongoing with our Muslim community, linking in with members of the City Regional Mosque Network. We recognise the impact on wider communities such as Sikh and Hindu communities, and have been working extremely hard with our Safer Schools officers around the reassurance and education messages within our schools across Merseyside. We continue to track hate crime, and whilst we have seen a rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic hate crime, these have not been at the levels that have been experienced nationally. We are tracking each of those crimes, and in the main it's manifested itself in the format of criminal damage and graffiti, so we are making sure with partners that there is robust evidence gathering, swift removal, and that we're working hard to identify the offenders who are responsible to bring them to justice. As usual, we've done a lot of communications around reporting hate crime, just to encourage that reporting, and lots of work with the university. As you've touched on, we have seen weekly protests occurring since the conflict began. And again, that by and large has been extremely peaceful. There has been minor incidents which we've picked up locally with the support of our faith networks, but really maintaining positive engagement with those protest groups, and we continue to provide that proportionate policing response. So by way of summary, Commissioner, that was my update.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that for anyone? No? Okay, great, thank you. The next emerging issue then was, since the last meeting, we have had the Peel inspection. So this is from HMIC FRS, so His Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. So for a bit like Ofsted, but for policing. So we've had that inspection back since, and there were a number of areas for improvement, as well as some positive feedback as well. So I just wondered if you could just briefly outline the outcome of that and any issues that might be relevant. And I'm conscious that we'll probably pick up some of the specifics as well as we go through today.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. We will, so I'll keep it high level. So HMIC FRS replaced its annual Peel inspection with a new intelligence-led continual assessment approach. This still includes the assessment of good performance set out in Peel Framework 23-25, and the final judgments are now more clearly linked to areas of concern and improvement. You'll know that the new HMI has set out a number of different areas in terms of the framework, so we can't compare this framework to previous reporting. And there were some national issues that have been picked up ahead of the Peel cycle starting. We're now one of 8 forces that have seen those Peel assessments, and we'll see in a slide in a moment some of the emerging themes from a national perspective. But some of the national areas that the new HMI had wanted to focus in on in this round of Peel, answering calls more quickly, in line with the standards set out nationally, ensuring the full benefits of protective orders, using data more in a more analytically astute way, and a very big clear focus on outcomes and the focus on outcome based. So it was pleasing to see our HMI Michelle Skier commenting upon our Peel inspection, saying that she was very pleased with some aspects of the performance of Merseyside Police in reducing crime and providing victims with an effective service. But there were areas that the force needed to improve upon, which I'll touch upon. She did also make reference to that Merseyside Police had, over that period, faced significant operational challenges, as we are all well aware of, since the last Peel inspection of 2021. I think it's important to note here what she did say about that. And she's reported that all of those incidents required effective leadership, the ability to use resources more flexibly and quickly respond to changing situations and level of risk, which the force achieved well. So if we just move on then to the Peel 23-25. So this slide demonstrates our gradings during this cycle, along with the other forces so far reported upon. You can see in the first red box there are some emerging patterns in terms of the outcomes across various questions there. So I'll touch on those very briefly. in terms of what has changed from our previous assessment, albeit you can't make a direct comparison. So question 4, responding to the public. Whilst we saw good use of the Thrive assessment in terms of monitoring threat, risk and harm during that initial call, and we prioritised those calls well and repeat victim checks were conducted, we did need to improve on some areas of providing preservation of evidence advice and crime prevention advice. And of course, the assessment set out in this cycle was clearly focused on ensuring that a force who would be graded as good would have to be answering their 999 calls in line with the standards set out nationally using the BT data. There is a slight discrepancy between the BT data and force data, as we've spoken about. Our 12-month rolling data for answering the calls within the 10 seconds was 74%, set against the target of 90%. No force is achieving the 90%, but that said, we'll touch on later on in the meeting our performance improvement plans in relation to that area. If we move on to question 5 and investigations, well, again, there were some real positives in terms of the quality of investigations, investigation plans and victims' needs being recorded and met. Clearly, the assessment was very much focused on ensuring that we achieve high levels of positive outcomes, so detections against the crimes that are recorded. And again, as we'll touch on throughout the meeting, right across the country, the Chief HMI has identified that they are far too low and they need to be improved across all areas. Question 6, PVP. Again, this goes back to some of the national issues in terms of protective orders and where we had some of the resourcing issues around creating some backlogs for certain things. Again, we'll touch upon those. And then question 10, leadership and force management. Whilst there were some huge positives in terms of our force leadership and force management, this is very much linked to your gradings of the previously mentioned questions. So if you're not achieving a good in the previously mentioned, you won't achieve a good overall under question 10. So in total, there were 11 areas for improvement identified through our peel inspection, or AFIs as they are known. We have a chief officer lead for every single one of them. The majority are areas that the force had identified ahead of the inspection, either with the ongoing governance work that we put in place or through the C4 operating model. But to further provide enhanced governance and oversight, I'll just very briefly now in conclusion talk about our response. So we now have implemented a performance improvement board which sits every month. I chair that performance improvement board. You will know that there is representation from your office in the form of your chief executive that sits on that board, and that goes from strength to strength. There are 9 specific areas of performance improvements across the force. Again, all of those have a chief officer lead, all of who are present today. The AFIs have either sit within the performance improvement areas or they've got bespoke action plans, and they cover all of the areas of the peel AFIs. And we will continue to monitor and improve our performance in those areas until we are satisfied that we've made sustainable, robust improvement, both to satisfy myself and the Chief, but also to provide that submission of evidence to HMI, who will also come back and continually assess us. And I'll finish on the fact that our most recent HMI inspection has been that of our serious and organised crime provision, and once again we have achieved an outstanding grading in relation to that, and again that sits alongside the outstanding grading that the North West Regional Organised Crime Unit, which Merseyside is the lead force, provides the leadership for, which is a fantastic accolade for the force.
Great, thank you for that update. Any questions from anyone? No, we're happy. And I suppose, as you've noted, as you say, in terms of how we monitor the actions going forward, so obviously Sue from my office will sit on that group and we'll monitor some of that in that progress as well, which is welcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So the only other emerging issue then was in response to retail crime, which is one that has been in the news quite a lot, and I've been approached by a number of local retailers who have highlighted the concerns around, I suppose, just the increase in the scale, but also then the police response and how much of a priority and what kind of a response Merseyside Police give. I suppose there's a couple of questions really in terms of what is the police response for retail outlets, particularly around shoplifting, and do you have any sense as to kind of what the challenges are here locally? Is that Jenny? Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, so we'll focus on problem solving in relation to the challenges posed by retail crime. As you can imagine, absolute focus on prevention. So we have a full plan in place which focuses on the victims of crime, the offenders that are responsible for that criminality, and the locations that are being targeted. And that goes hand in hand with working with our partners to tackle this issue. So in terms of some of the tactical activity which is being delivered, as part of the Safer Business Action Week, we delivered several plainclothes operations, are working hard with retailers to design out crime. We have a full communication strategy which weaves in our preventative messages and are linking in with schools and universities. In terms of our approach to offender management, there are robust interventions in place to deter prolific offenders from committing further offences and also identify patterns and trends so that we can wrap mitigation around that. Some of the other work we've been progressing with our retailers is to ensure that we maintain the best possible evidence from crime scenes. So training our retailers about how to provide statements, how to secure the CCTV evidence, how we can design out crime and maximise the evidential recovery opportunities so that we can bring those offenders who are responsible to justice. You've alluded to there the shoplifting offences and what does that look like on Merseyside. So if we take the period November 2022 to October 2023, we had 8,117 offences recorded. That was against 7,248 offences reported the previous period, which is a 12% increase. When you compare us to the North West region, North West regional forces have seen a 14.1% increase in terms of volume. So whilst we're performing better, clearly there is still much work to do. We have a full plan in place, which we often refer to as a 4P plan, which covers the pursue, prevent, prepare and protect. And there is a raft of activity which mirrors the National Action Plan set out by MPCC around actions that police forces need to proactively undertake to target retail crime.
Thanks for that. And I think one of the concerns raised is that where the shops are detaining or gathering evidence or doing some of the things that you've highlighted, that there's an anxiety, certainly nationally, this is a concern that's been raised, around whether the police then actually turn up to gather that evidence or to try and then take the offender off the hands of the security, for example, who might have detained them. Are you kind of content that Merseyside Police are responding to those calls when they come in?
I am, and as part of the Thrive risk assessment in terms of the necessity to deploy, that's absolutely the key consideration for our call handling staff, and as part of the retail action plan, we pick that up as part of regular monthly scrutiny.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for anyone on that? No? Okay, great, thank you. So those are the emerging issues. So if we just jump back then to the data dashboard. So again, for anybody watching for the first time, this is a snapshot really, so we can just see what particular things have changed since the last meeting. So sorry, it's item 3 on the slides. Is it on the slides? Yeah. Oh, can we get it up on the screen? Do we have that? Does it not? Oh, I see. Sorry. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Fine. Okay. It'll be published on the website though, won't it? Yeah. Okay. So basically, opportunity to have a look at the snapshot and see what has changed since the last meeting. So I don't know if Chief or Deputy, do you want to address any of the?
I can speak to this PCC.
Oh, sorry. Go on for you.
That's okay. PCC dashboard demonstrates an 11.7% decrease in crimes recorded over the period. However, percentage of solved outcomes has actually increased to 13.3%. and then the calls answered within 10 seconds. So the dashboard demonstrates that 76.7% of 999 calls were answered within the 10-second period. However, our most recent data for November shows a marked increase in that percentage rate to at least 78.9%, and increasing again in December, which I'm pleased to say. For emergency incidents attended within 15 minutes, the PCC dashboard demonstrates that we do that within 96.1% of the time, which is great. And then for our percentage of 101 non-emergency calls answered within the 60-second window, we are currently sitting at 35.3%, which is a decrease on the previous year of 21%. Moving on to our reductions then. So reductions in the total number of incidents in all categories. We're seeing that across the board now, with the exception of antisocial behaviour, which has only been a marginal increase. And then the other categories on the dashboards will be discussed in more detail as we go through the slides today.
Thanks, Fiona. So in terms of the, I suppose the key one to highlight there is the percentage of, it's particularly 101, isn't it? And 999 calls answered within a slight decrease in 999, but quite a significant decrease in 101. And I know we have picked up on this before, and recognising that obviously there's been a huge amount of demand coming through the call centre. But in terms of an update around recruitment of staff, and filling the call centre, and any other changes to try and manage some of the demand that's coming through.
Commissioner, yeah, I'll answer that. I will just make mention of the demand issue, because I think it's important in terms of the context of what we're dealing with. So we have seen 16 or over 16,000 additional 999 calls year to date. That's an increase of 8%. When you compound that with the length of time that our staff are taking to deal with them appropriately, assessing the level of threat, harm and risk contained within those calls, in 2020, an emergency call took 7 minutes to deal with. In 2023, this is taking 9.5 minutes. And similarly, we've seen similar increases in non-emergency calls, the time it takes to process the call. So obviously that is in effect an equation where you're multiplying the number of calls coming in, the time it's taken, with a finite capacity of staff. So that's been our challenge for the past few months, and we've seen that seen that challenge within the FCC. We recognise not only the observations of HMIC, but clearly we recognise the importance of the impact on the community. So as a result of that, we are temporarily posting 24 police constables for a period of 6 months into the control room. That will be on top of 6 restricted officers that we've also identified from Response Strand. And that is to address what we perceive to be a shortfall of 30 officers or staff into in the FCC currently. So we are hoping that's a temporary measure. We are working really hard with People's Services, who are working very hard on our behalf to increase our levels of recruitment into the organisation. One of the key issues is the amount of time between the application and appointment. So we are looking to speed up that process for the point of application, the assessment centre, the vetting and medical. So we think that will be a more attractive offer if we can speed up that process. We are also looking at other forces to see what best practice we can pick up on, to see if there's anything particularly around recruitment that we can learn from. I think what we should highlight is the recent Ofsted inspection of our call handling apprenticeships. We got a grading of good, and I think that's a real positive in terms of the support we can give our staff in terms of their training, and we will use that as part of the press release to advertise the call handling posts that are available. As I say, I hope this will be a temporary measure in terms of additional staff. We hope our recruitment will be able to fill those gaps. So we've got an intake of 5 intakes over the next 12 months of 16 members of staff in each one. So hopefully over the next 12 months we will see our recruitment and our retention enable us to meet that demand and retain those numbers in the FCC.
In terms of the demand picture, is that something that is unique to Merseyside, or are all forces seeing similar increases in demand, do you know?
It's certainly not unique to Merseyside. All forces nationally are seeing a significant increase in both 999 and non-emergency calls.
And then in terms of the officers being posted, recognising that obviously you're hoping it's a temporary measure, are there any concerns around knock-on effects around officers coming off from kind of more frontline duties and the impact that might have on other areas around visibility?
I think that's always a concern when you're moving resources across the organisation, but we recognise the priority is to give the members of the public, the community, that level of service at the front end. So I don't think we can effectively manage their needs unless we can answer the phone in quick time and assess that level of information and deliver an appropriate response. I think it's also worth highlighting that within the HMIC FRS inspection, the actual quality of the way in which our call handlers are dealing with members of the public, the information they're getting from them, has been recognised as very high. So it clearly is a capacity issue that we're working really hard to address.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the 909 bit? No? Go on.
With the temporary officers posted to these positions, will there be a delay in them being effective and efficient? Because if they're only temporary, if there's a long delay, it may reduce the impact.
We are fortunate that the officers are being posted and are police officers, so therefore the training they require, they don't need as much training as someone new into the organisation. So very quickly we'll be able to deliver the training that they need, and they can start to improve our operational effectiveness on the front line.
Okay, thank you. And then we are going to discuss it later, but I think the other bit that we noticed from the dashboard in terms of quite a positive story is around the significant reduction in homicide and firearms discharges. Is that right, from our reading of it?
Yes, that's right. We're going to discuss that in a bit.
Okay, great. Any other questions on the dashboard from anyone? No? Happy? Okay, right. So if we move on then to, so we're on to item 5. A, which is around tackling violence against women and girls. So there's a couple of introductory slides, I think, around what the police response is, I think, and then we'll go into some specifics. Who's introducing this? Shirley.
It's me, Commissioner. Thank you. Yes, just want to give you a high-level overview of the governance arrangements and the programme approach that we've got in relation to our vulnerability approach. So on the slide you will see, obviously vulnerability covers a significant number of crime types or thematic areas, and we are now managing this within a programme of work with the overarching objective outcome to improve the quality of our service delivery for those most vulnerable in Merseyside. On the right hand side you can see the more specific objectives, and the 6 relate to, if I can just go to the next slide, the structure there as the programme is set out. So you will see that the programme approach is governed by the ACC as the strategic and senior responsible officer, and beneath you will see the 6 thematic areas and the 6 crime types, all within the National Vulnerability Action Plan sitting above it, which is led by Chief Superintendent Nairi Wayne, the head of PVP. In terms of the governance, there are various checkpoints you can see at the bottom there. So these are things where we get to the end of a phase and we review. All of those checkpoints then lead into the programme board, again chaired by the senior responsible owner, and fed in then to the Chief Constable at the Strategic Management Board. I don't propose to go into anything further unless you want to ask specific.
So we did have a couple of questions, but I'm just checking if... I suppose the main question was around training, and I don't know whether we'll pick this up in terms of, but I suppose training across all areas of vulnerability. So we're going to go on to talk about some of the specifics around VOG, but in terms of vulnerability more broadly, where are you at with training frontline officers, Mark?
Yes, Commissioner. So just to touch back on that previous slide as well, those 6 areas that we selected, obviously there's quite a number of correlation back to your VOG delivery plan as well, so they match across in that sense. As Shirley said, there is a huge amount of work within this portfolio in terms of its depth and breadth and complexity. These are the 6 areas that we really feel there's large pieces of work connected to them. Opposite areas we'll come on to a little later in the presentation being one, as well as outcomes for domestic abuse and child protection. So big areas that we need some governance around. Just to touch again on Shirley's point, there is a 3-monthly vulnerability board meeting that I chair. but there are then monthly and bi-monthly checkpoints to make sure that the actions that we have set within each of those 6 priority areas of work are moving with pace. To then go back to the question that you posed around the training, so the vulnerability training, which is focusing largely on voice of the child, for our frontline staff, took place over the last 12 months. What we know now is we've had 1,582 staff trained in this, thereby raising their awareness around VORG issues and the impact that VORG can have on our communities. That has gone out to our first responders, it's gone out to our investigators and also our control room staff. So again, going back to the points we made earlier around those touch points with our front-facing responders for our community. And the key driver around that is obviously increasing the quality when we do engage, being more empathetic, more able to recognise vulnerability and also knowledge around legislation. We haven't just started 12 months ago, as you'll know. We've had 4 consecutive years of DA intensification in Merseyside, 2 months, November and December every year, where we've driven quality around domestic abuse, evidence-led prosecutions, in order to provide a far greater quality of service and making sure that our first responders, whether that be answering the phone, responding to you at your home address, or investigating your crime, have the best opportunity to provide for you, whether it be a safeguarding outcome or an outcome in terms of a positive court result. Moving forward now, we've also got domestic abuse matters training. That will come online once we've identified our champions in order to deliver that. That will take place in April. They will be trained, and then the training itself will start to roll out in September 2024. Again, looking at making sure that our staff can recognise coercive and controlling behaviour as soon as possible and put the steps in place to try and eradicate that and put your life back on a different pathway, a more positive pathway.
Thanks, Mark. Dr. Jeannie?
Thank you. In terms of the domestic abuse matters training, I know you've been under incredible pressure over the last few years to get a lot of new recruits through and trained and out working as quickly as possible. But we know the impact of domestic abuse on communities is really, really significant. So is that training going to be available to the recruits as they're coming through the training process, as well as existing officers? I'm just thinking about that, how we get that maximum impact of the training.
Yes, certainly. In terms of the work that we've all got ongoing at the moment, which is Operation Palais, and I'll come back to that training in a moment, we have a team of officers that are continually reviewing the learning that we're finding from every incident that we respond to. That training or that learning is then packaged up and delivered to our frontline staff and to our young recruits. Because what we recognise, I spoke a moment ago around the DA intensification that have run for 4 years, but the staff at the front end, our first responders, are continually changing. They are moving through the organisation, and our new recruits are coming in who've never experienced that training. So yes, the DA matters will absolutely form part of that training, but also they are already getting this learning, the live learning from us, reviewing our responses, reviewing our files, reviewing our how we've dealt with victims when we turned up at their home address. Those key themes and trends are then fed back to our new recruits as well.
I'll just come in there, Commissioner. So DA Matters training has probably been around now for about 7 years. So when I first came to Merseyside in 2017, it was actually cost prohibitive for us to be able to do it. So we actually worked with some academics and we worked from the University of Lancaster. And so over the past 7 years, all of our officers have been having 2 days of vulnerability training, and which we devised ourselves, working with the academics. They did the coercive controlling behaviour piece, and then we put the rest of the package together. So it's not, so the DA matters now, there's funding available, we are doing it, and it's become almost been mandatory for forces to do it, but we have been doing that 2-day training for all frontline officers across the board since 2017.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely fantastic to hear. And the fact that you took that initiative and just went ahead and rolled it out in your own. I think what I'm really interested in is that you are bringing that live learning. And I would love to know more about that, because I think that really brings this issue to life and makes it relatable for new recruits to come through. So at some point, I'd love to come out and see how that works.
Yeah, of course. And again, that isn't a new thing for us that we're doing with Op Palais this year. We've previously had in our DA intensifications. Certainly 2 years ago, we started that live learning. We had a team that was put together by the Chief Constable to make sure that every single crime started to be dip sampled, and the learning came out of that. It was presented back to our corporate meetings as well, so senior leaders recognised it as well as frontline staff.
Okay, thank you. If no more questions on that, then if we go on to look at the statistics then around domestic abuse specifically. Fiona, are you going to talk us through this?
Yeah, I'll speak us through this section. So we start off with domestic abuse and solved outcomes. So you can see here from the graph for the current financial year to date, there have been a total of 14,789 domestic abuse crimes recorded, and that's against a total for the same period last year of 17,490, which is a reduction of 15.44%, which I'll give you a bit more information about in a second. Moving on to outcomes, then there has been a reduction of 105 outcomes, which is 8% compared to the same period in 2022. And just some background on why those reductions are there. So there's recently been a change to Home Office counting rules that looks to reduce secondary criming. So what that means is if a domestic abuse incident is attended to and it relates to multiple crimes, that only the most serious or violent crime will be recorded in this way, so it takes precedence over those other offences. So because of that change to Home Office counting rules, that will change how our data is presenting this year. So for example, a domestic abuse incident might also include malicious communications or harassment. If the domestic abuse incident was violent, the domestic abuse incident would be recorded as a violent offence. So that's one of the reasons. There's also been a reduction in domestic abuse incidents since August in Merseyside, which actually goes against the long-term seasonal trend. And those reductions have been seen more keenly in Liverpool Central and Wirral local policing areas. We think that I mean, to be honest, it's quite difficult to pick that apart. But as Mr. Kamina has just alluded to, domestic abuse has been a focus for Merseyside Police for quite some time. Operation Pally has made a significant difference in that respect. And so because we've been doing some more focused work in this area, we think that that is behind those statistics. And then just with regards to outcomes, outcome 15 specifically. So outcome 15 is named suspect, victim supports the action, but there's evidential difficulties. So we report that 17% of all domestic abuse outcomes this year were recorded as outcome 15, which is an increase from 16% last year. And then in outcome 16, which is the named suspect, we've got a named suspect, but the victim declines or withdraws support. We've got that as 70% of all domestic abuse outcomes this year, which have been closed with outcome 16, which is a reduction slightly from 71% last year. However, solved outcomes has increased from 8% to from 7% last year.
So we're still saying 70% of all domestic abuse cases end in outcome 16?
That's correct, yeah.
Gosh, that's higher than I thought it was. And is there work we're doing then to try and, I suppose, respond to, I know we're going to come on to talk about victims in a minute, but in terms of then keeping victims engaged and supported so that we get a better outcome? Mark?
Yes, Commissioner, yes. We've had Operation Blackbird, which you'll be aware of, where we've got IDVAs going out with police officers, both frontline and around those 2-month intensification periods that we've had running for the last 4 years, with detectives as well, just to try to make sure that we get that best evidence at first point of contact. We recognise this is a really challenging area for victims because of the nature of the relationship that they find themselves in. And we recognise as well, nationally as well as in Merseyside, of that high level of disengagement, and it's really, really important for policing to provide an intervention as early as possible, because we recognise that is the best opportunity for us to gain that evidence. And I go back to the 4 years of the intensification around evidence-led prosecutions, because we recognise from that outcome 16 data, we do have an awful lot of victims that do step away from an initial engagement with us, but we want our staff to have a mindset whereby they are very much suspect focused, looking for other opportunities as they would do with other crime types. So house to house, we recognise CCTV is highly unlikely. This often takes place in private homes, but starting to do house-to-house inquiries, starting to be have voice of the child in the forefront of their minds to protect, even if we can't have a positive outcome in terms of a charging decision, and our investigators to be looking for those evidence-led prosecutions, but also for DVPNs, which I know we will come on to as well.
Yeah, Jeannie, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. I was really interested by what you mentioned around making sure the voice of the child is being heard. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we recognise this is an incredibly important area for us. We have had voice of the child training from a CPD point of view rolled out across the force, which a huge number of officers have completed. We recognise that all of our VPRFs from our DA instance where children are present are now forwarded through to the front door of Children's Services. Operation Compass has been reviewed by the prevention strand to ensure that it is fit for purpose, and actions put in place to improve both our notifications to schools and the understanding of those notifications. We actually had, about 2 weeks ago, the creators of Operation Encompass come into the force as well. So that's Elizabeth and David Carney-Howarth, who actually set this up. They came in and delivered training not just to frontline staff, but actually to the senior leaders. I attended it myself. Really, really powerful, impactful, and that is getting rolled down. So as our staff recognise the need to engage fully with children. So lots of training taking place, lots of engagement, and being reported in. We've got a slick process or an efficient process around ensuring that those support services, including schools, are made aware around any voice of the child referrals.
Okay. Bissy, do you have a question?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I'm interested in learning more about the backlog. How do you intend to reduce the backlog for the domestic violence disclosure scheme? And are you now delivering all these disclosures in person or maybe virtually? Please, if you can explain better. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So we recognise there are some pressures within the Vulnerable Persons Referral Unit that manage both VPRFs and also the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme process. We have had a problem-solving review take place via our prevention team to look at new and more efficient ways of processing domestic violence disclosure schemes. Previously, we recognised that we have probably provided almost a platinum service by looking too deeply into the past around victims and offenders before making a determination as to whether we should issue safeguarding warnings or disclosures. We are now reviewing that, and on top of that we also recognise that our Vulnerable Persons Referral Unit probably needs some additional resources in there, very much like the front end in terms of call handling that you heard from Paul a moment ago. The level of or volume of referrals that are coming in have increased greatly, and we recognise, as I'm sure everyone does, the complexity within each of those referrals has increased significantly over years, and therefore we need some additional resources in there, which is a position that we're just looking into at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the other areas that the PL inspection that we discussed at the beginning highlighted was around the use of preventative orders to try and safeguard victims and vulnerable people. So it was just a question around the use of what we call domestic violence protection notices, or DVPNs, and also then DVPOs, so the orders, and how you're responding to the breaches when they're breached.
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. So wherever possible, we will look to arrest and prosecute around breaches of DVPNs, DVPOs, when we are informed of them, or when local policing will come across them. So what I can say is that in 2023, up till the end of November, there were 359 DVPNs issued in Merseyside, with 5 recorded DVPN breaches. November 2023 saw the highest number of DVPNs issued, with 58, And then in terms of our DVPOs, so they obviously, as many will know, the orders that go on following the court appearance in relation to those DVPNs. And in 2023, up again until the end of November, there were 343 DVPOs granted in Merseyside. November again saw the highest number of breaches so far this year, with 50 being granted. There were 79 reported DVPO breaches in the same period. Of course, some of those breaches may bleed over from October's timeframe, so which is why there's a difference between those two numbers, I'm sure you're aware. If I just touch a moment on what we've tried to do around evidence-led prosecutions, we wanted to make sure that the staff weren't just moving straight to a DVPN. So we know from the Outcome 16 data that we have an awful lot of victims that will disengage within those first sort of 48 to 72 hours. We wanted to make sure that we weren't using that, our officers weren't using that then as a reason just simply to go for a DVPN. What we're asking them to do now is hold on to that investigation for longer to try and tease out the evidence-led prosecution. So that might then have, as we move forward over the coming months, see a slight dip in DVPNs because we're looking for that evidence-led prosecution rather than a quick exit as a DVPN. A DVPN and a DVPO provides fantastic safeguarding opportunity, but only when there's no other options available. We would rather try and provide that safeguarding through a positive outcome, which will involve, obviously, a court response following the judicial process.
Okay, great, thank you. And so in terms of respecting what you've just said, are we seeing an increase then in the use of is there more awareness now, you think, from officers to make sure these, if they can't get the evidence-led prosecution, they are putting these orders in place? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And Merseyside historically has always been a really high user of DVPNs, which is a very positive picture. We just want a slight shift in that mentality towards evidence-led prosecution first. And if we're absolutely certain that we can't go that route, then we'll look at a DVPN at that point.
You want to ask us, maybe?
I just wanted to ask a quick question about kind of high-risk perpetrators of domestic abuse. I know how much Merseyside Police works in partnership with other agencies from when I've chaired CSPs in my own area, but I think in terms of high-risk offenders, how are you managing that?
Yeah, this is an area that is under review for us at the moment. I know Jen is doing some work around this as well, right across the board, not just in high-risk domestic abuse. But in terms of domestic abuse, we regularly have meetings with partners to discuss the process of managing our most high-risk DA perpetrators. In January, a multi-agency tasking and coordination group will be piloted in Knowsley as well, to be supported full-time with the constable and a detective inspector to chair that meeting, again, looking at our high-harm perpetrators. We do recognise as a force, and this is reflected nationally as well, that a large volume of our domestic abuse crime is committed by a small number of perpetrators. We obviously use the relationship risk index as well to try and identify those. There are some challenges with it. We understand that. Again, I mentioned a little bit earlier that it's about policing something that often takes place in the home, and it can be difficult to identify. We recognise through the Outcome 16 data that a lot of our victims disengage, and that there's a relationship there, however dangerous it is, and the victims can, on occasions, bring the offender back into the home. So there are some challenges for us, but we are alive to it. We are piloting some new ways of working, and there's a wider piece around IOM to make sure that we are at the forefront around tackling those who are the highest harm.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, yeah, sorry, just on that point, in terms of the nominal management review, as you know, we've moved to a new structure recently, command team corridors, real focus on place. Part of the review will encompass how we're briefing officers and staff from across the different strands, so that they're absolutely aware about those who are the highest harm in terms of offending, those protective orders, so that we're really harnessing the resource that we have available and providing real clear briefings to make sure that there's a full wraparound. So that's the work that Mark's just alluded to, which is in progress at the moment.
Great, thank you. Any other questions then on the domestic abuse slide before we move on? No? Happy? Okay, if we move on now then, Fiona, it's back to you. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to homicide by type. So you can see here by the slide, so this slide it looks at the crime picture in relation to homicide together with whether or not this was a knife or firearm enabled crime, and whether this was domestic related or not. So you can see here from the slide, Commissioner, that there's been a huge reduction in homicides this year in comparison to previous years, as I think he alluded to at the beginning of this meeting. It's important here to note that the types of crime on this slide are not mutually exclusive. So domestic and non-domestic homicides are mutually exclusive, and then the ones underneath with the dotted lines can be in either or category. So what this slide shows you is that since 2019, we have seen 80 homicides as a force, 3 of which have been in 2023. And then moving on to homicide by local police in areas. So the force overall has met the crime reduction target for homicide, with each area, apart from Sefton, recording a reduction in homicide this financial year to date compared to last. And then I might pass to Mr. Kameen for some more information on that, if that's okay.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, Commissioner. So, really positive pictures, as we all recognised. Probably add that there has been 3 additional homicides in the last 2 months. That takes us to 6 for the financial year, against a position of, I think we were at 20 at this point last year. We were going to talk about firearms discharges later in the presentation, but we know that they are significantly down. Knife crime is down, serious violence is down, our domestic homicides are down as well, which is our big key drivers for homicide. There's a host of work ongoing across all of those portfolios, and then the work that we've seen with Clear Hole Build as well, which can all contribute towards those reductions. And yet, as we all learned with great tragedy last year, how things can swing very, very quickly the other way. And indeed, as I've just mentioned, in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we've had 3 homicides, having gone for 6 months by just having 3. So we do recognise that it's a really challenging area and things can change quite quickly around this. But there is lots of positive work that's ongoing across 4P plans that ensures that we are delivering as much as we can against the fight against serious and organised crime, which of course homicide is linked to. The DEP has already talked about the outstanding grading for Merseyside in relation to stock as well. That does play a part. And I think the recent sentencing that we've seen in response to those really tragic murders from last year and at Christmas last year with Ellie Edwards really resonates, I think, and sends a very clear message out that if you are going to think about committing homicide in any guise, through any means, there's a very real chance that within Merseyside, with our detection rate, it will be detected, and there is a very high probability thereafter that you will be heavily sentenced by the courts, and therefore you're also giving up your life if you're looking at getting 40 to 47 years, as we've seen.
Thanks. Yes, I mean, it is a really welcome picture in terms of, as you say, from what we saw last year, and particularly as we head towards the year anniversary of Ellie's murder. I think it's welcome that we're seeing such positive progress, albeit obviously we want to get to 0. Do you have any sense of, you've kind of said why you think you might have got to that point around some of the Clear Hole Build work and various other things. Is it, again, looking at other forces, is there anything are other forces seeing a similar pattern, or is there something unique to what we're doing in Merseyside that you think is having such a positive impact? Or do you have any sense of that?
I think certainly from a firearms discharge point of view that it's reflected elsewhere. We are, I think, first, if not second, in terms of our homicide reduction nationally. Certainly when we were sat at 3 homicides, with the latest 3 that we've had, I'm not sure of our position. I think it's very challenging to try and determine exactly what this relates to. There's been, as I've talked about, the Clear Hole Build. There's been an awful lot of work taking place in the nighttime economy in order to remove threat, harm and risk there. Place-based work where we identify our high footfall areas which have high crime around serious violence. And we've seen huge amounts of positive activity as a result of that. In fact, the Chief, myself and others went down to the Home Office to present on that very work that's ongoing at the moment. Jen could probably speak a little bit more around that. And that's had a huge reduction in serious violence and knife crime, which we know is a key driver for us in our homicide data.
Commissioner, I'll just add, I mean, Mark's articulated it well there in terms of it's ensuring that across multiple different strategies that we know impact directly in terms of our homicide figures, that those robust plans that we've got in place are being enacted and actually delivered out on the front line, both from a Merseyside Police perspective, but also from a host of partners that work across both serious and organised crime, domestic abuse, serious violence, knife crime. So it is a huge combination of factors. I'd make one point: we were one of the first forces to take on board the homicide prevention panels, and we've been doing that now for the last 18 months or so. So after every single homicide, we'll do an immediate, very fast review of the circumstances to see if there's any immediate learning for anyone involved in those individuals. To Mark's point, you know, where we have had that reduction in homicide from this time last year, 20 to 6, that is a huge reduction. And you see in terms of the numbers that we had in 21, 20 and 19, it's still a significant reduction. There are only 4 other forces across the country who have seen a bigger reduction percentage-wise in their homicides. So only 4 other forces across the country. And of course, in some of those forces, the numbers are very, very tiny. So they might have seen 2 to 0. So they've had a 200% reduction, etc. So I think it is a remarkable picture, not just for the families and the individuals who are impacted upon in relation to that, but in terms of the region and Merseyside as a whole.
And then, so I suppose to follow on from that, similar to the homicide kind of reviews that you were just talking about, do you do a similar engagement exercise around the domestic homicide reviews and making sure the learning is taken from that as well?
Yes, Commissioner. So a Detective Inspector attends all our DHR meetings to ensure that we have consistency around our police response and for learning, and the recommendations for the reviews are then agreed by the Detective Chief Inspector and are then shared with partners, and all the police recommendations are collated and a delivery is monitored by our PVP unit, vulnerability unit, sorry, who deal with policy and procedure and learning. So there's absolute grip there. We are currently in the process of writing our homicide prevention strategy, which will include domestic abuse within there, and that's in its final stages, and should be ready before April next year, which again will take into account learning from DHRs as well.
Great. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on homicides? No? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to satisfaction among victims of domestic abuse. So this slide looks at that satisfaction report. So during the period August 2021 to July 2023, we had a total of 3,015 surveys which were submitted. However, only 379 responses, which is a response rate of 12.6%. So that is obviously quite a low response rate in that regard. So, however, what we can determine from those responses is, in terms of ease of contact, we achieved an average score of 91% per month over that period, which is a fairly stable picture. In terms of action taken, we achieved an average score of 66% per month over the period. And again, the low numbers of responses can manipulate that data slightly and change it quite quickly depending on what those responses are. In terms of follow-up, we achieved an average score of 51% over that period, with the highest satisfaction level being in September at 71%, and at the lowest being in March and April with 13% per month. And then in terms of treatment, we achieved a score of 92% over the period. And satisfaction rates have remained at 100% since March 2023. So just in terms of that whole experience, the responses that we did get had us at an average of 88% over the entire period.
Okay, thank you. Jeannie?
You've covered a couple of the points I was going to have questions on around sample size and response rate. But I think linking to that, one of the questions I did want to ask was, how are you actually collating that data? I think one of my worries is that if people are going back into relationships, or they're back in the situation that they were to begin with, are they going to be completing data surveys that are sent out to them and returning them? And then what you're going to do to try and improve that response rate?
Yeah, okay. So the data for the domestic abuse surveys are collected from a Delphi download called Domestic Abuse Survey, and it's set for the current month with a consent required as a yes or no checkbox. And so that download looks at the VPRF1 to see if the victim gave permission for a third party to contact them, and then that provides the actual results. So the download is then scrutinised to establish if the victim can be contacted safely by phone, and then within the download, a victim may have several offences within 1 month, and because of that, it's only the latest offence that's added to that survey. So during the research of each individual, victims are removed if more current domestic abuse offences have occurred not contained within the downloads, and they're removed if the offender is living with them, obviously, as well. So.
Deputy Commissioner, just so you cited, so the I don't know if you are aware, but the surveying is done independently of Merseyside Police, so we outsource that to Leicestershire. When we started the relationship with Leicestershire Police, they were doing it on behalf of about 16 forces. There may be more than that now, but before we went into that relationship with Leicestershire, we kind of did all the checks in terms of safety to make sure that we weren't putting victims at risk by surveying them. We would like the numbers to be higher, but it's one, victim safety, but then two, whether victims do then kind of answer the phone and engage with the survey that Leicestershire Police do on our behalf.
Okay, thanks, John.
Excuse me. How else do you monitor victim satisfaction?
Yeah, sorry. I was just looking at just to add to that. I'll come to the answer on that now. I just wanted to highlight as well. We've started the Good Sam pilot as of today, which is the 3 months period of starting with a rapid video response to low-level DA, which Kent has had some significant success with, and I raise it now because of that victim satisfaction, particularly the ease of contact and the actions taken. So despite some of the challenges at the front end that Paul has spoken about a moment ago, we are still looking at that continuous improvement around recognising that, particularly with domestic abuse, that opportunity to engage and capture the account from our victim, there's a very small window around it. And so that starts today, so it's pertinent to point that out. So what we'll have then is low-risk DA victims will be transferred to an officer who will conduct a video call where it's safe to do so and take that account from them. Whereas what would happen previously is that low-risk DA victim might not have seen the police officer for 24, 48 hours thereafter because of the low risk that they pose. So there's a real opportunity there linked to our ease of contact and victim satisfaction to improve that through this new way of working, as well as quicker response, better safeguarding opportunities from the immediacy, and then hopefully better outcomes because we have victims staying the course. In terms of victim satisfaction, we have a set of values around quality objectives, which is the minimum standards, if you will, albeit we don't really like that term, of how we engage with our victims and look at opportunities for them to feed back to us. Better ways, again, around ease of contact, but for every 28 days we expect at least one contact call, and I can say that in 97% of the time for the last 2 years that's been adhered to, making sure that there is a constant and regular engagement. We've got new process in place now whereby instead of a lot of our victims going straight into the call room to try and get back in touch with the investigator is now leaving personal contact details. Nothing groundbreaking, I appreciate, but it's adding to the workload within Paul's portfolio. So it's trying to reduce that work whilst also making sure that ease of contact is there.
Okay, happy? Yeah. Okay, any other questions then on the satisfaction piece? No? Okay. Okay, next one. I think we're moving on to rape and sexual violence now. Yeah, Fiona.
Okay, so you're quite right. This slide shows our figures for rape, crimes and solved outcomes. So if we can start with crimes, Between April 23 to September, there's been 599 crimes recorded across the force, which compares with 751 for the same period last year, and that equates to a decrease of 21%, which I'll give you more information about in a second. In terms of outcomes, our solved outcome rate for April to September has increased to 7.35%, in comparison to 5.60% of the previous year. And then just in terms of that decrease in the recorded number of rape incidents, again, it's quite difficult to understand what is sitting behind that data, but we believe as a force that that is down to an increase in our targeted intervention, so targeting domestic abuse perpetrators right across the force with different operations that we have going on. Op Pally that Mark alluded to earlier obviously has a direct crossover with our rape outcomes, and then there's also a lot more collaboration across rape investigations and KPI activity to drive those outcomes. And then in terms of the outcome rates, we have increased the number of specially trained officers in that area, so they now work 24/7, which we believe has attributed to that increase as well.
So, sorry, I missed that. When you say, so why do we think there's been a decrease then in the recorded number? Because...
Sorry?
When were you saying that, well, because there has been a decrease in the recorded number of rape incidents?
Yeah, so we believe that the decrease in recorded number of rape incidents is because of our increase in targeting domestic abuse perpetrators throughout the force, which is what we alluded to earlier. So
you mean you're preventing, because you're proactively targeting domestic abuse, you're preventing then potentially rapes happening within that setting?
That is what we think, yes.
Right, okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. What have I got questions about? Operation Soteria, we have talked about that, I think, last year in terms of a new way of investigating, and obviously there's a slight increase in outcomes there, which is really welcome, albeit it's a challenge because it could also be because the incidents are coming down. But in terms of Op Soteria and how that's being implemented, where's that all up to?
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. So we touched on this a little earlier in the presentation, then it sits under the Vulnerability Programme Board that I am chairing, because that piece of work is significant and will be ongoing for many months to come. We've got a dedicated team around that in order to implement those 6 key pillars: suspect-focused investigations, repeat suspects, procedural justice approach to victim engagement, learning, development and officer wellbeing, data and performance, and digital forensics. That team are now embedded. They have just completed the first stage, which is the self-assessment process, which is quite an undertaking in itself. That needs to be submitted by the 1st of January. And then from that, the results, feedback and gaps that we identify will be brought into a further development plan under my vulnerability board, and we will then devise the responses in relation to that and design that sort of transformational piece whilst working with the national project. And then part of that, obviously, the digital forensics and also being victim focused does touch on the return of victims' phones. So we're in a strong position there within Merseyside. We've only had 2 devices that were kept in police property for beyond the 24 hours that the Home Office expect. However, what I would say is that on both of those factors, it related directly to the victim. So the victim wasn't actually available then when the phone had been examined to come and have it returned to them. Therefore, if we were to remove those 2 for that reason, then we are completely compliant. We do have as well a large number of phones that we can issue out to victims if they're not able to have that device returned to them within that period, or we think it's going to be longer kept for any reason at all.
Okay, good, thank you. Did you want to ask your other question?
I was actually going to ask a question around the phone, so I'm glad that you covered that, and it's good to hear that you're working so proactively in that area, because it can be a massive barrier to people coming forward. I suppose my only other question was around the victim's right to review. So how are you promoting that and making people aware that that is in place, and how many have you conducted over the last year? Do any of those relate to rape or sexual assault?
The Victims' Right to Review is managed by the CJU, who document and record each right to review that the force receives. From the 31st of October 22 through to 31st of October 23, we've dealt with 40 victims' right to review for rape and sexual offences. The VIR process has seen a dramatic increase in this year, which we think is due both to raising awareness with victims and around support services also being cited on this and raising awareness of it, and escalating decisions and giving victims the confidence to do so as well. We've also obviously had a review of how we deal with and investigate rape. We've had SDOs been put in place, so they're getting, I think, a more professional advisory service, even from within the policing environment, to tell them of these opportunities. So the VRs for Unity are held by DCI Paul Parry and reviewed accordingly. If any of the cases are appealed by the victim, a further review is conducted by a Detective Superintendent who's in place at Unity and allocated to that department for further review. And obviously the CPS have a series of rules around their right to review as well.
Okay, any other questions on that one? Okay, thanks. Go to the next slide.
Okay, so moving on to other sexual offences. So this slide shows that between April 2023 to September 2023, there has been a total of 1,472 crimes recorded across the force, which compares with 1,595 for the same period last year, and a decrease of 8%. And then in terms of outcomes, so for the current financial year to date, there's been 162 solved outcomes in comparison to 191 for the previous year, and that is 11.01% in comparison to 11.97% for the same period in 2022. And in terms of those that decrease in outcome rates for crime type, again, quite difficult for us to understand what sits behind that, but it's not currently known whether that's due to underreporting or due to the positive proactive policing that has happened in this area. So that is currently being monitored through our corporate support and development team.
In terms of that challenge, because it is a perennial challenge that everyone has around understanding as to whether it's an actual reduction or whether it's people aren't confident to come to the police, do we look at, and I don't know what the timescales are, but the National Crime Survey, which is supposedly more accurate because that asks people whether something's happened regardless of whether they report to the police, is that right? So I don't know whether do we ever look at that and compare to see whether, because I think it comes out later than what we have here, but do we ever look to see whether there's any comparisons to see whether we can tell if it's actually a reduction or whether it is people have had it but they have experienced it but they haven't reported it? Does that make sense?
So I'm not sure, to be honest, Commissioner, but I can find out for you and come back to you.
It'd just be interesting to know, and I think it's probably not unique to Merseyside, but it's always that constant challenge, isn't it, of trying to get the balance between whether people are reporting or whether it is actually a reduction, which is what we would like to see.
Commissioner, we'll pick up as a specific point in terms of what we're talking about here. We certainly will look for some high-level comparisons between two, and if there are any anomalies, but whether we do the specific work like that, we'll take that out and report back.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it'd just be interesting to see. Okay, any other questions then on the other sexual violence? I think we've covered it on the last slide. Okay, next slide.
So this takes us over to stalking. So I'll start off with crimes again. So between April 23 to September, there has been a total of 1,439 crimes recorded across the force in comparison to 1,691 for the same period last year, which again is a decrease of 15%. And then in terms of outcomes, we have achieved 5.3% in solved outcomes rate from April to September compared to 5.1%, so slightly higher in that respect.
Sorry, I'm just digesting. Do you want to ask a question?
I've got a couple of questions on this. I hope that's okay.
Yep.
And hopefully I'm not kind of going a bit too far one way or the other. I hope they make sense. But I think what I'm interested in is how are we making sure that call handlers are able to identify what stalking and harassment is, because it is such a, often victims don't realise themselves that pattern of behaviour is beginning. So how are we training officers to make sure that they can see that?
Okay.
Deputy Commissioner, I'll answer that. So in terms of call handlers, they are assisted by a system called Call Assist. So as the call comes in, any information in terms of previous calls information will be presented to them to enable them to make an informed decision about how to deploy officers. We then have the first line responders. So in terms of when they are deployed, either a fast time in terms of emergency response or priority or even a scheduled response, they will apply or complete a VPRF, and that has the relevant questions in there taken from the stalking checklist, and that will enable them to get a full picture. We are actually awaiting a national protocol at this point just around that, but for the time being we'll use the VPRF. And obviously then when the matter is then passed to investigation, then investigators will look at previous incidents, they'll reopen crimes, and they'll be able to assess if there's been a pattern of behaviour previously, and that will aid an effective investigation.
Okay. Any other questions then? So, sorry, I'm just checking. So, did you want to ask about CPS and positive outcomes? Have we addressed that? Sorry, I'm losing track. No. So, in terms of positive outcomes then, I'm working with the CPS to get some of the positive outcomes. What are we doing around that?
Yes, Commissioner, I'll answer that. So, recognising the outcome rates reflective really around DA and the challenges of this particular crime type aren't where we wish them to be. We have put training in place with mandatory packages across all of our investigators to ensure that they have that strong understanding around the difference between stalking and harassment, particularly focusing on the fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated elements of the offence type to try and make them have a greater understanding. We are making sure that if we can't secure a charge, that we are looking at protective orders as well. We have now put in place our digital kickstart team. That is a team that sits within our intelligence function but starts to recognise the fact that a great deal of our stalking offences can take place online, and therefore making sure that the investigator has a strong and bespoke investigation plan that is cyber related, which provides the best opportunity around identifying those responsible, gaining the evidence to reach a charging threshold and then ultimately conviction. So that team's in place now and will do an awful lot of work to support the investigators in ensuring that their investigation plan is bespoke to that. So there is work to be done in that arena, similar to domestic abuse. We know there's a real correlation between those two crime types as well. In terms of the work with the CPS, there's a monthly CPS meeting which scrutinises stalking and harassment incidents, looking for best practice and areas of learning, both from a police point of view and CPS point of view. Cases are discussed and any points for better outcomes are raised and circulated for wider learning as well.
Okay, good. And then in terms of the stalking protection orders, that's obviously one that we've picked up last year, and I'm aware there's been an increase this year. Is there any more update on that?
Yes, we've undertaken training around this area of work as well, which included a partnership working with 4 solicitors and CPS, delivered to investigators over a 5-week period, which is going to be repeated once again in the new year, again with the intention of just trying to raise that awareness to then drive up outcomes and safeguarding measures.
Okay, good. Right, any other questions then on stalking? Yes, Bissy.
Thank you very much. It's interesting to learn about the work of the digital kickstart team. So am I right in concluding that most of the stalking that happens in Merseyside sort of happen online, or do you have any data to sort of back this up, please?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the data with me, but there is a great deal of this is conducted online through the use of mobile phones or social media sites, as you can imagine, and therefore the digital kickstart team are there to provide, rather than the more standardised and well-practised investigation plans that we might all expect, house-to-house, CCTV and such like witnesses. This is about moving them into a mindset that places them more online to provide those opportunities that not all investigators might be using on a day-to-day basis. Raise that awareness for them around the opportunities around identifying those responsible for the stalking through a digital strategy.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions then on stalking? No? Okay, if we move on then to harassment, Fiona.
Okay, so taking us to harassment then, so starting off with crimes. Starting off with crimes, between April 23 to September, there have been 5,031 crimes recorded across the force, in comparison with 5,352 for the same period last year, and that equates to a decrease of 6%. And then in terms of outcomes on those numbers, we have between April 22 to September, we recorded 303 solved outcomes, and between April 23 to September, it's increased to 306, which is an increase of 1%.
Okay. Jeannie,
do you know why there's been a decrease in the recorded number of harassment incidents? Or have you got an idea? Because obviously I can't ask you to give me a definitive answer on that. But what do you think?
Again, we think that this is similar to the issue that we discussed earlier. So there's been a change to Home Office counting rules. So generally speaking, harassment often accompanies other what some might consider more serious or violent offences, and so the harassment might not be considered the principal offence, and so wouldn't be recorded as harassment there. So.
My question relates to the Street Safe app. I wasn't aware of it till I read through the papers, and I've downloaded it, had a good look, and it looks really, really useful. So the question starts with, can you give us some examples of how you are using the information from the Street Safe app?
I'll take that one. Thank you. Yes, so the Street Safe data is reviewed weekly by the local policing management support team, and then is forwarded to the relevant local policing area to review, and then overlay that information with other intelligence and crime reports. The data is also shared with local authority representatives, because some local authorities have their own mechanisms about how members of the community can report areas of concern. So I think it's really important that there's coordination and overlay of that information so that we can prioritise the greatest areas of concern. Once that information is being considered and overlaid, then that information is reviewed by our problem-solving team to really work with our partners then to see what measures we can put in place to make those improvements. And, you know, some of the feedback that we've had around environmental and behavioural issues are examples such as signs of drug and alcohol use, poor street layout, so blind spots, hidden areas, the absence of CCTV, and then behavioural issues that have been reported through the app are feeling like you are being followed, that there's loitering ongoing at that location, or that people are suffering from unwanted attention. So that is the work then that forms part of the discussions with the community safety partnerships, to work with our partners about how we can fix that, and then cascade and communicate what we've done in response to those concerns being raised.
Follow-up question is, having had a look at the app and seen how useful it could be, I wonder if there's a specific way that you're marketing this app to young people to encourage their use, because it seems like it has a lot of potential there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of our communication strategy moving forward is really considering which platforms are the most appropriate way to reach our target audiences. So we've done some really great work with local gyms and the radio provision that's in local gymnasiums. We are pushing out key messages through our Safer Schools officers and the role of the Safer School Coordination Officer, and really looking to think about how we can use different social media platforms so that we're really targeting the right messages to the audience that we need to reach.
I think it would be fair to say there's been both Merseyside Police and the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner have done an awful lot of promoting of the app. but it's just, I don't, when somebody perhaps is walking home and feels like that or spots something, it's not the first thing that springs to mind. Unfortunately, that's despite loads of comms out against all the different platforms. So it is something that we need to continually carry on doing.
Okay, happy?
Final question. Again, relating to the Street Safe app, any examples of actions or improvements that have been implemented as a result of the data that, as you've analysed it?
Yeah, so the issues I've just alluded to in the key behavioural and environmental issues have been picked up. So what we've seen is improved CCTV, improved lighting with the community safety partnerships. And as the Chief's just touched upon, it really is how we get the messages out there so that you said, we listened and this is what we did to make those improvements. So yes, there are lots of examples from across the force where working closely with partners to make those improvements to the environment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions then on the harassment? It's a fair point, I think, the Street Safe app. I think we're very conscious that particularly harassment can sometimes feel quite low level, but people then don't know where to report it to. So I think there's definitely work to do, I think, around capturing some of that, because there's so many kind of isolated incidents, but they all build up and could generally make women feel unsafe. So it's an interesting area to look at. Okay, right. Next slide then, Fiona. I think we're on to harmful practices now. Thanks.
Sorry, my clicker doesn't seem to be working. That's it. Yeah, thank you. So moving on to harmful practices then. So this chart provides the monthly trends of honour-based abuse, female genital mutilation and forced marriage, and its crimes recorded since April 2022. So what we can see here is for honour-based abuse, we have recorded 6 crimes of honour-based abuse compared to 16 in the same period the previous year. For female genital mutilation, we've recorded 0 crimes from April to September this year in comparison to 4 for the same period last year. And for forced marriage, we've recorded 0 crimes again from April to September in comparison to 2 for the same period last year. And then just in terms of why we think those there's fewer recorded incidents this year. So those figures are based on honour-based abuse, forced marriage and female genital mutilation types. So it doesn't actually take into consideration any actual additional offences, which, although not recorded as those, actually do fall under the harmful practices umbrella, I guess. So an example of that would be where we've we've crimed something as controlling and coercive behaviour or a domestic incident, and it could be a harmful practice.
Is that the right approach to take, given that the numbers are so low around this and we don't really understand the full picture of it? Are we concerned that if we do that, we're going to miss out on recording things like FGM and honour-based abuse and things?
Sorry, the first part of that question, sorry again, Commissioner, was...
Sorry, so Fiona was saying that actually she's saying there might be cases where this has taken place, but it's been crimed under something like controlling behaviour within an abusive relationship. But I suppose given that these numbers are so low and there's a real challenge around getting these reports in, are we adequately then getting a sense of what the real issue is?
Yeah, I think from our flagging system then, if for any reason that the recording of the crime has to be done differently to what the actual one of those crimes is saying, so there's multiple crime is reported to us, one of which falls into this crime category. If we have to record a more serious or different crime, then there's still a flag placed upon that to ensure that it's recorded against as an honour-based crime. So that ensures that there's an all-encompassing capture of that data, if you will. I'll probably leave it at that for the moment.
If I can just add to that as well, Commissioner, I think for harmful practices, what we also need to consider as a force is that a lot of families are reluctant to have crimes recorded in this way. So there might be repercussions from family members for pursuing that type of crime. And so that's just also a little bit more richer information there.
Bissy, do you want to?
I mean, mainly to support what you said as regards people being unwilling to speak up. I think that's the reason why I was I was very concerned, as soon as I saw all the figures, it's really, really low. So just wondering how you actively engage with our communities across the Merseyside, mainly to encourage victims of HB and FGM to speak to the police, especially when these things sometimes relate to culture or faith. So how do you encourage victims to speak to the police? Thank you.
Thank you. So we know that our community engagement unit and local police officers link directly into local women's groups who are working to give presentations regarding domestic abuse that incorporate this crime as well. We work very closely with Severa UK, who also communicate and support that they can offer to communities and victims, and engage in programme events such as White Ribbon Day as well, all designed to make sure that stigma is lifted as best as possible. As Fiona has talked about, another very challenging area for us around the vulnerability portfolio, with victims not wishing to, one, potential embarrassment of reporting some of these crimes, fear for their own safety if they do report them, from family members, as we know, on occasions, and, of course, for family then getting in trouble as a result of that disclosure. So an awful lot of work is undertaken through those groups, the community engagement group, as I say, local policing, and working very closely with Severa UK. We've attended a number of training and support sessions arranged by Severa UK. It's important we recognise that they understand how committed we are in relation to supporting them and thereby victims. So we have run those training events with them around the FGM group, which has encouraged and enabled potential victims to come forward and speak to the police with other agencies present to provide that additional layer of safeguarding. And also ongoing liaison with Severa UK provide an invaluable advisory role when we are dealing with victims of this crime type. So lots of partnership work in which we recognise is key to ensuring that confidence is there, that when people do come forward, they'll be treated with dignity and respect, confidentiality wherever possible.
Any other questions then on harmful practices? You happy? Okay. Okay, next slide then I think is child sexual exploitation. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'll just talk briefly around the child sexual exploitation slide. I know you will be aware that following the Community First operational review, we undertook a problem-solving approach to examine internal processes and structures, including cross-force interdependencies, to determine where functions in relation to child sexual exploitation and child exploitation should be improved. From that review, the CSET team, so the Child Criminal and Sexual Exploitation Team, was created. This will provide an excellent opportunity for a proactive, centrally located capability, whilst also maintaining a localised footprint around offences that involve child criminal and sexual exploitation. It will provide more efficient and accessible partnership response, and also what we know from this particular crime type, and indeed like many crime types across vulnerability and wider afield, it is borderless, and therefore the fact that some of our teams previously were placed within hubs, we feel that a centrally located team that is pan-Merseyside provides a far greater and more professional response. Recognise that there are thousands of children exploited across the UK, and Merseyside is no exception. And our response around this, therefore, now that we have the CSET team in place, is all-encompassing, because we'll have a modern-day slavery team wrapped around exploitation offences, sexual offences, cybercrime offences, county-line drug dealing, all of which is incorporated, not in this team, but we have a response across each of those areas. So the CSET team is now in its inception. We are currently building the resources around that. I'm having the PAN-MASA tomorrow, so a multi-agency safeguarding response with all of our partners. I know previously there's been some concerns around it being centrally located, but we've got that on the agenda for tomorrow to explain to them exactly what the improvements are that this centrally located team will provide.
Okay, thanks. Jeannie?
Thank you. That was really informative. I think it sounds brilliant, and I've been very lucky as the chair of the Modern Slavery Network to be able to work with some of your officers who have fed into the work that we're doing as part of modern slavery, and they've been absolutely fantastic. Their knowledge and experience has been invaluable, to be honest. I think in terms of this specifically, what I wanted to ask is, how do you deal with that kind of really tricky age range between 16 and 18, where they're still young people, they're not adults, they may be vulnerable, they may be neurodiverse. How do you deal with investigating the grooming of those young people to be engaged in criminal activity or exploited?
Thank you. Well, what we know from past experiences, this is another challenging area for us around vulnerability, and is very much focused on building trust and confidence with the victim for them to engage. Building trust and confidence with victims takes a significant period of time. And so firstly, having a dedicated team that aren't distracted by other crime types helps to in achieving that objective. It also helps improving the intelligence picture around who is committing these offences, who is at risk of being a victim of them. And therefore, we then have a professional team that are well versed in what best practice looks like when tackling child criminal and sexual exploitation. Every incident, of course, will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Every child is different. Every child has separate needs, which is very much in line with our community first strategy around having a bespoke response for that victim of crime or that member of our community. When young people are groomed, we'll look at opportunities to use special measures and intermediaries wherever possible in order to support them through that process, taking the time now that we've got that dedicated team to build that rapport, build that trust and care in order that they come with us on that journey. The investigation will be very much child-centred, and we will ensure we attend the strategy meetings as well, effective use of partners, as you would imagine, because going back to what we spoke about previously around partnerships and Severa UK and other examples that we've already spoken about, we recognise that often we might not trust the police, we might not be the best people to build that rapport. So we very much realise that the strategy that we must take, it often will be slow, in order for the time to build that rapport. Many of these investigations can take over a year whilst we bring that victim with us, while we get that trust and that confidence to stay with us throughout the prosecution. So the team will be very professional. There was dedicated training. They'll have experience with partners, and that trust will be built from within.
And sorry, Commissioner, just add to that. I know from specific examples when we've all been duty cover recently, and we get a more detailed briefing on some of the cases that might be taking part over that 7-day period. And there's very much a suspect focus on these investigations. And as we've discussed with rape and Blue Star, and also in terms of domestic abuse, that evidence-led style to the prosecution. So I think that is also an important feature in relation to that.
Great, okay, thank you. Any other questions then on CSE, Bissy?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We've had reports from the media about children of asylum seekers and refugees arriving in the country, most of the time maybe unaccompanied. So do you think these children might also be classed as at risk of CSE, child sexual exploitation? If yes, what have you done to sort of support such children? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Are they at risk? Yes, of course. They certainly are. Our staff are aware of that. We have a modern slavery human trafficking team in place, and I know there'll be some slides that we'll come to in the near future around that. We are aware, and our staff are trained and made aware of the national referral mechanism to make sure that they are given the right protection and support should they become victim of that. So there is a process in place, and there, as I spoke about a slide or two ago, there is a team around modern slavery human trafficking that, if that is a better placed team because of the nature of the offence, offences that are identified, then that victim will be supported through that mechanism as opposed to the child criminal sexual exploitation team. So wherever that is best placed to provide the requisite safeguarding and support to the victim will be put in place. But there are then wider measures around partnership working and the national referral mechanism that can support that young person or child.
Okay. Okay, right, we'll move on then to hate crime. Thanks, Fiona.
Okay, so moving on to hate crime, starting off with crime. So for the current financial year to date, we have seen a reduction of 9% in recorded hate crime from 2,878 to 2,613. And then in terms of outcomes, our solved outcome rate from April to September is 17.25% compared to 12.4% in the same period in 2022. We think that that reduction might be down to an increased use of, we think that the increase in outcomes might be down to an increased use in community resolution, which provides an outcome against the suspect, and it takes away the issues around victims attending court, which works well as a victim-led approach. We also have dedicated hate investigators and HCCs, as that's been an area of investment on resources for the force this year as well. And then in terms of encouraging reporting of hate crime, the PCC, as you know, commissions Stop Hate UK and commission support services, other commission support services who also individually work with communities in regards to raising the awareness and the importance of reporting hate crime generally. Okay. So moving on to hate crime by type then, so you can see here from the slide that the vast majority of hate crimes fall under racial. Over the last 5 years, that's accounted for 60% of all hate crimes across the force. That's followed swiftly by sexual orientation at 22%, disability at 10%, religion is 4%, transgender hate crime accounts for 3%, and sex worker hate crime accounts for 2%. And then other, which is age, gender, that accounts for 0.5%. And then moving on to local policing area. So you can see here, during our reporting period, there were 7,993 hate crimes recorded across the force. The overwhelming majority, you can see on the blue line there, happen in Liverpool, which accounts for 52.9% of all recorded hate crime. That's followed by Wirral at 14.4%, Sefton 13.6%, Knowsley is 10.5%, and St Helens is 8.6%. And that is our hate crime slides.
Just going back to what you're saying about the other. So you said gender and something else was 0.5%, but other than transgender, gender isn't recognised as a hate crime. So why would that be in there? Unless I've misunderstood.
To be honest, I don't know. I've got age, gender, and alternative subculture.
Yeah, so maybe a data quality issue in relation to the recording of that. And so if you haven't got anybody who's, or the information's not being provided, there's another category. So anything else will go into that other category.
Jeannie, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you. I'm so sorry, I'm coughing past myself today. Please excuse me. I wanted to try and understand why there's been an increase in the recorded incidents of trans hate crime. Now, obviously, I think there's, and I wouldn't expect you to comment on this, but at the moment, I think from a political perspective, we can see that discourse being played out across social media. But actually, on the ground, are you seeing that? Are you seeing that more people are coming forward, that it's becoming more of an issue for you? And I think it links also to that kind of the steady rate around sexual orientation, that's kind of remaining at a level that's still quite high. What are we doing to kind of tackle those issues? And I suppose it comes to me, it is a, I suppose, quite sensitive issue for me, because I do have a transgender son. So I remember last year, when the Brianna incident happened, and it hit me as a parent really hard, because I remember ringing my son up and saying, you know, stay at the station, I'll come and pick you up. And he wasn't at risk, but that fear generated, you know, real panic in me. So I think it is quite an issue for the LGBT community, which is also why I want to say thank you for the work that you do with Pride. And also, this is clearly why it's so important that you do that.
Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. I was going to raise Pride. It's, I think, from my point of view, it's difficult to identify exactly why that is. We will hope that that is confidence in the police service that we provide, and I think Pride has a huge part to play in that. How do we quantify that? I'm not quite sure, but having that support over several years, seeing us marching through the city in hand with our communities, I think it can be difficult to quantify just how powerful that is. And therefore, if you do become, unfortunately, a victim of this type of crime, how much does that influence your desire and confidence and trust in us to report the crime to us? As I say, I can't measure that, but I do think that has a big part to play in it.
And I think you're quite right in terms of the social media reporting, that the national media reporting and the kind of narrative for our trans community at this moment in time has meant that there has been that slight increase in hate crime. And we've had feedback through our networks and through our relationship with LCR Pride that our trans community do feel vulnerable at this moment in time. But I think it's the fact that we've seen a slight increase in reporting is also a positive because of the work that we have been doing to raise awareness. We've got, you know, our trans CAG, so our relationship with our trans community has been important and a priority to us, as well as with the wider LGBTQ+ community.
Okay, thanks. Bissy?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Please, can I start by adding my thanks to the things that Jeannie said, mainly because I've also experienced how hard you work really when it comes to tackling hate crime. I have two questions on this subject. 52.9%, like you said, is really, really high, you know, just based on the comparison to other areas in our region. So have you looked into the reason why Liverpool has a very high level of hate crime? And my second question is, based on the report that officers on the front line are also likely to have faced hate crime as well, what have you done, you know, to actively support officers who are likely to be subject to hate crime in their line of duty? Thank you.
Do you want to deal with the figures and then I'll deal with the second part?
Thank you, Commissioner. So, yeah, so as you said, an overwhelming majority are reported in Liverpool, 52.9%. We think that that is more around the fact that there's just simply more people in Liverpool. People interact in a different way in Liverpool. We've got the nighttime economy that we have to think about as well. So all of that would contribute to that increased number of hate crimes being reported in Liverpool.
Thanks, Fiona. And then in relation to our own staff, we have, whether you're a victim or internally or externally, and by that I mean if you're a victim of hate crime in all its forms and you are a member of Merseyside Police, or indeed a victim as a member of the public, we have now dedicated hate crime coordinators throughout all of the areas which provide that bespoke support, once again, of a real understanding around the partnership opportunities and support networks that are in place for you. And then if we look internally for a moment, we've spoken about Pride already and the impact that that has externally, so our public looking at us, how we support this area of work, but equally our staff see that as well. Our staff are part of it, and we see growing numbers year on year who come and march. We have a variety of support networks, as you would expect, internally, so in the organisation for our staff, to make sure that everyone can bring their whole selves to work and that work is a really positive and safe place to come.
Okay. And then John.
Excuse me. In what ways is Merseyside Police engaging with younger communities to raise awareness of hate crime and to encourage their reporting?
Thank you. So our hate crime coordinators work closely with our community engagement unit and Safer Schools officers to really make sure that we've got consistent messages going out within the educational establishments, but also across the Youth Justice Advisory Board and engaging with youth groups to make sure that we are engaging well. Individual areas also use local counsellors and other providers to assist with this messaging. Some examples such as Bully Busters used in Sefton and St Helens, and Wirral also have a unit called the Minority Ethnic Achievement Service. So a real robust process in place which is based upon the needs of each community, which of course, as you can appreciate, is different and unique at each place.
And Commissioner, probably just to maybe conclude this section from our perspective, when we're talking about ensuring that we are relentless about bringing offenders to justice, then in relation to hate crime, we discussed it this morning on the Chief Constable's briefing. We sit at an outcome rate this year of 17.5%. That's the highest outcome rate across a broad range of different crime types. So this is for hate crime. That is an increase of 3.6 percentage points from last year, which is a significant increase. So I think, we demonstrate that relentlessness in relation to identifying people when we've got victims coming forward, that we bring them to justice, which definitely then has an impact on confidence within a broad range of different crime types.
Great, good. Any other questions from anyone around hate crime then? No? Okay, I'm going to suggest we stop there and have a break because we've covered quite a lot in that meeting. So I think we'll be back in about 10 minutes. So we'll be back again at 3 o'clock if that's right with everyone. Thanks. Okay, great. Right, thank you for that. And welcome back. So we will crack on now where we're going to do cybercrime. And then we'll move on to SOC. So, Fiona.
Okay, so the slide here represents the trend for cybercrime. So in terms of crime volume, we've seen a significant decrease in the volume of cybercrime month on month when compared to the same period last year. The solved rate, however, has been steadily increasing from June 2023, following a little decrease after January. The solved rate for September stood at 8.3%, which is good. In terms of the breaking down of this slide, I'm just going to take you, actually I'll take you to the next slide before I talk you through that. So this slide shows you cyber-dependent versus cyber-enabled crimes. So cyber-dependent crimes are offences that can only be committed by using a computer, computer networks or other forms of IT, whereas cyber-enabled crimes are traditional crimes that are increased in their scale by the use of computers or other forms of IT. So taking you through some of this detail then, this slide that is up at the moment, it displays all crime types flagged as having either a cyber element with a breakdown between cyber-dependent and cyber-enabled. So a crime shouldn't be recorded as both cyber-dependent and cyber-enabled. It's one or the other. And you can see here on the slide that cyber-dependent crime features more cyber-enabled crime is clearly predominant across all crime types, whereas cyber-dependent crime features more in fraud and stalking and harassment than other crime types. Yeah, I think that's it.
So in terms of then, just to understand it a bit better, so where we talk about burglary, residential home, so all the crime, so any cybercrime related to burglary was all cyber-enabled. What does that mean? Is that like using I don't know, like a doorbell camera or something? I don't know, to hack. I don't know. How would that be cyber-enabled?
Yeah, so as we've said, the dependent element of it is that it can only be done by the computer. The nuances, I suppose, around the burglary one, I'd have to say, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head as to how that would take place. It might be something to do with, in fact, off the top of my head, I can't even think how that would be. We'd probably take that away as an action if we could. PCC.
It's just interesting to know, isn't it, in terms of where the computer comes into it as a burglary, but.
Yeah. So unfortunately don't have that detail, but as Fiona said, as you're no doubt aware, the dependent element is that it can only be committed by use of a computer. The enabled one is the fact that it just sort of enhances the opportunities around that crime type. So they can still be committed without the use of a computer or computer device. Sorry, is that what you were going to...
I was just going to come in. I mean, there are clearly offences of burglary where the individuals will use some sort of jamming device or some other to enable them to get into the vehicle and or potentially to get past alarm systems. That would be at the higher end. But they would be some examples of where that might be the enabled element for burglary.
That makes sense. And then in terms of then the numbers and the outcomes, do we have any sense as to why we've seen a reduction in the numbers of incidents? Because it doesn't feel like something that wouldn't usually get recorded. So do we know why there's been a reduction?
Well, what we would say around the cyber elements of our policing work is that our cyber team have highlighted as one of the highest performing in the UK and one that gets cited regularly as an area of best practice. We have quite a sizable team compared to the rest of the UK and regularly receive grant funding and Home Office awards because of the work that we undertake across the 4Ps and the success that we enjoy. Some of the rationale around some of the reductions in reporting often comes back to, as we've spoken about already this afternoon, Commissioner, around Home Office counting rules. Some of it can also be around staff not being aware of that cyber-enabled or cyber-dependent element when they are recording the crime, and there's training ongoing in relation to that. The data doesn't actually show or highlight the fact that our cyber-dependent outcome rate is far and away above the national average. And again, I spoke about a little earlier on when we talked about domestic abuse, stalking and harassment, around the fact that we have a digital kickstart team that has gone live earlier in 2023, 5 staff in place at the moment and more staff coming in. And they will, as I explained earlier, scan for any crimes that have a digital or cyber element and thereby provide support to the investigator with applications around online data apps as well as phone downloads. And of course, the digital kickstart team will feature in a moment when we talk about the crime trend or by types. So our outcomes still are really positive. There is a huge amount of work going on across the 4Ps, including raising awareness around school children, in terms of hacking of secondary school systems by pupils. So we've got some work ongoing around that. We are working alongside the Force Ops team, operations team, for cyber response to all major incidents likely to be subject to cyber attacks. So we've seen Eurovision and Labour Party conference, to name just 2. We're also having a cyber awareness day at Hugh Bird College in 2023, with working with schools across Merseyside taking part in cyber challenges. It was a huge success. We had a digital PCSO within the team who is invaluable and providing educational messages to schools, businesses and communities. So a really strong prevention element within that cyber crime response.
And in terms of then how that links with the National Police Chiefs Council and the National Cyber Crime Strategy, presumably there's a lot of similarities with that work.
Yeah, there'll be a crossover to within our 4P plan around this that will actively address that plan also.
Great. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on cybercrime, Bissy?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm interested in knowing if this cybercrime, is also seasonal in our region as well, because we know that around this period of the year, people are shopping a lot, especially online, and you know, some of these criminals are getting very clever. They are using AI to clone websites and all that, and even when you have a delivery, you don't really know if the website is real or not. So is there anything you're doing to support our communities during this period of time when people are likely to be victims of this type of crime? Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. With the increased use of technology, it provides offenders with a more varied and wide-ranging way of which committing crime. Thankfully, what it also does then is provide policing a more wide and varied opportunity to detect that crime as well. And absolutely, with Christmas here and large amounts of online shopping taking place, it does provide rich ground for those that wish to exploit that opportunity. But we are regularly putting out messages around, from a prevention point of view, raising awareness, working with partners, particularly in the banking industry, to ensure that customers are well aware of phishing crimes, of people contact them over the phone, as you'll be well aware, and providing their details to them using authorised websites. So lots of prevention advice that comes out from our cybercrime team whilst looking at those themes and trends and correlating that advice in line with those trends.
Okay, thank you very much. If we move on now then to tackle serious and organised crime. So again, Fiona, over to you, I think.
Commissioner, yes, I will talk to this. I don't think we're on quite the right slide there, are we, on my slide deck? But just while we're looking for that, our strategy around serious and organised crime, we have a various elements in place. Clearly, from start point, there is a clear and accountable senior responsible officer, an SRO, and an LRO, a lead responsible officer, around all of our geographic thematical areas of SOC. 4P plans are in place around all those key areas, so protect, prepare, prevent and pursue. We ensure that we have portfolio leads around the key areas of focus, so firearms, homicide, drugs, county lines, cybercrime, economic crime, human trafficking, modern slavery. And from 2024, we will include organised CSE and CSA within that SOC governance structure. And we have a lead in terms of our SOC, a force lead in terms of the head of the Air Force Intelligence Bureau. It's a well-established force priority, as I know you'll be aware, and forms part of our commitments with the Chief Constable to make sure that we are directing staff and they're aware of their business. We focus heavily on the prevention and vulnerability around SOC, evident from Clear Hole Build that we've spoken about before, and we have 3 live sites across Merseyside that you'll be aware of, partnership-led operational delivery groups to coordinate activity in each of those sites. I think it's probably fair to say that in years gone by, we've been heavily focused around pursue elements of our 4P plan, and with good reason, often because of the nature of our serious and organised crime. However, you'll be well cited now that we are very focused around prepare, protect and prevent, and rightly so, and we're seeing some real success around that too. As the DEP had pointed out a little earlier on, of course, we've been graded as outstanding yet again in our fight against serious organised crime. I think that's been in place now since 2014, and also the North West ROCU, for which the Chief is the lead Chief Officer for, has also been graded as outstanding, the only ROCU in the UK to get that grading. We will talk and have talked previously around homicide, around firearms discharges as well. There's been some excellent work that's taken place across all of those 4 Ps in that fight against crime, serious and organised crime. But recognising, again, as I said earlier on, there is a picture that can change very dramatically and suddenly. If we look back in just the last 4 weeks, we've seen 3 discharges in a very short space of time, despite enjoying some really, really positive figures in this area of business. So not one that we'll ever take our foot away from the accelerator around this, but always looking up and out around opportunities to improve how we tackle serious and organised crime, but a very strong plan that is recognised by HMIC in place already.
Okay, should we go through some of the data? Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to non-domestic homicides against victims under the age of 25. So we're pleased to say there have been no under 25 knife-enabled homicides financial year to date, 23 to 24. In terms of the volume, so clearly we're comparing 2022, which was a particularly challenging year where volume of homicides was higher than previous years. But 23 has seen significant reductions, which we think can be attributed to a number of factors, including reduced firearms discharges, as Mr Kameen has just alluded to, but also an enhanced approach to protecting vulnerable people through our new PVP strand of work, and also preventing crime and harm in our communities through our prevention work as well. Domestic abuse arrests and outcomes are increased, so this earlier intervention will hopefully lead to reduced opportunities for escalation. Yeah, I think that's us.
Good. I mean, we touched earlier around the homicides reduction and what's been done, so that's very positive. Okay.
And then moving on to knife crime against victims under the age of 25. So the chart that you can see here shows the long-term trend for all knife-enabled serious violence, which is the blue line, and all of those cases involving victims aged under 25, which is the green line. So financial year-to-date comparison shows a 9.4% decrease for crimes and 3.9% decrease for under 25 victims. So the offences themselves show a long-term decrease in trend since a spike you can see here in June 2022, albeit March 23 also had an increase in offences. Yeah, I think that in terms of high-level information, that's just there for the reason, yeah.
Do we know what that spike in March 23 was down to, or is it a seasonal? I'm trying to see if it's a seasonal thing.
March 23.
March 23.
I don't have that information to hand, Commissioner, no, sorry.
No, that's okay. But yes, broadly very positive, moving in the right direction, which is what we want to see. I don't know if there's any update in terms of, we've already talked a bit about serious violence, but is there any update in terms of anything else you want to add about the work being done to try and tackle some of that?
Commissioner, yes. So, as you know, some really positive news. November 2023 recorded the lowest level of knife crime in Merseyside for over 3 years, and I think it would be remiss really to not focus on some of the preventative work, and I'll try to cover it briefly, but I'm sure I won't do everybody justice. So hotspots policing, as you know, we've adopted a approach to pulse policing within the areas that have the highest harm and highest crime for serious violence. And we've seen significant reductions in serious violence, including knife crime-enabled criminality. And what that's allowed us to do is really make sure that we're using our resource smartly and pulsing into those areas at the right time, and really undertaking positive engagement with our communities. And in addition to the reductions in criminality from feedback surveys that we've undertaken with communities, it's been really great to hear that the community are really receptive to seeing our officers and staff out and about, and feel so much safer with the visibility plans that have been in place at those locations. I've touched on problem solving a couple of times today, but when those issues then are picked up at those locations, including those 14 hotspots, that's allowed the teams to work effectively with the community safety partnerships to look at things like street lighting, CCTV, alley gating, etc., to really make a difference. We are one of the pilot forces for serious violence reduction orders, and the force really worked hard. We are 8 months into the 2-year pilot and have managed to secure over 50 orders against individuals convicted of knife crime. The aim there with those orders is to prevent reoffending and change behaviour. And I know we touched earlier on about making sure that then those nominals are known to our staff, so that we can mitigate an action around them to engage with those individuals and prevent future offending. We touched throughout the meeting about the communication strategy and how we get key messages into the right areas of the public domain, so that we can reassure communities, but then also push out our proactiveness around the robust policing response in relation to serious violence and carrying weapons. And I'm sure you saw some of the press recently in relation to Operation Sceptre in relation to knife crime, and Operation Calibre in relation to robbery. Both of those were spotlight policing operations, which was a week of intensified action. Clearly, it's a priority 24/7, 365, but what those weeks of actions really allow us to do is focus and harness our energy on those two particular issues. And some of the results that we saw that period, 150 weapons surrendered, schools delivered school talks to thousands of young people, really focusing on that trauma-informed approach and building those relationships with our young people, which is pivotal to building that community trust and confidence. And it was something that we did in conjunction with the educational leads through the Violence Reduction Partnership. So there was a real consistent delivery throughout the schools, which received fantastic feedback from educational leads, pupils and parents. We also have done an awful lot of work in relation to county lines, but I'll pause there because I know there's some slides later on.
Great. So not much then.
Lots.
No, it's
Lots
good,
of
lots,
stuff.
and you know, as I say, I welcome it. It's good that there's such focus on it. Any other questions on knife crime? No. Okay, next one.
Commissioner, I was just going to say, I think, you know, when we asked that question, right, why is it that we've seen that reduction in, and we talked about homicide, we talked about knife crime, we talked about firearms discharges, etc. It's that combination of factors, and it's the strength of the plans that are in place across all those big, broad strategic areas. Again, not just Merseyside Police, but in partnership with a whole variety of different statutory and non-statutory partners that we work with, supported by yourselves.
Okay, so moving on to firearms discharge volumes. So the forces recorded an overall 66.7% decrease in firearm discharges compared to the same period last year, which is 18 offences from 27 to 9 in volume. Knowsley is the only area to have recorded an increase of firearm discharges this financial year to date compared to the same period last year. And then just in terms of the reduction of numbers, I think we have already touched on it. I don't know if you wanted to go into any more detail.
Commissioner, I'll talk through that, if that's okay. Yes, so just to pick up on what Fiona has talked about, calendar year to date, as you'll see on the slide there, the most update figures are we have had 21 discharges this year. Financial year to date, we've had 17. Those numbers we recognise, if you compare us to the likes of Cheshire, North Wales, Cumbria, are still really high. But if you look, I know it's difficult to see some of the figures on the slide that you've got on the screen there, but you only have to go back 4 years to 2019, and we finished that year with 82 discharges in total. Now we are coming to the end, obviously, of the calendar year, and we are at 21, so absolutely enormous improvements. I have said it a few times here today already, but we recognise from the events of August last year and indeed Christmas Eve last year how quickly those can change. But we have seen a consistent downward trend for the last 4 years in terms of there's a slide that follows on from the one that we are looking at the moment that highlights that. If we could just move through one, Fiona, there. So you'll see that consistent downward trend. The red line is the total fatal and injury discharges. The blue line are the total discharges. And 2019, moving into 2020, is when the firearms investigation team were implemented in Merseyside, a dedicated team that you're aware of to review and investigate firearms discharges. Since that period, we've seen significant reductions. We've seen outcomes going up. Most recently, the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief Constable commissioned a review internally around that critical review of firearms discharges over the last 23 years of Merseyside's history to try and understand better why that reduction has taken place. A large part of that was around the implementation of the firearms investigation team, the whole force approach, the governance meeting that's in place. We can't look further as well than Operation Venetic that's had a significant impact. And I spoke earlier on around, despite those tragic murders, the sentencing that has then followed on from that, following those investigations and the work of the whole force. Sends out a very strong message the clear hold build sites also have a real impact on those involved in serious and organised crime. Our outcome rate has gone up significantly. We work very closely with the National Crime Agency around a number of initiatives, and we are doing some work in the prevention space around lawful to unlawful weapons, trying to reduce the number of those that are out on our streets held by licence holders, in the hope that they then don't fall into the wrong hands to a burglary or by other means. So there is a vast array of responses around firearms, which has placed us firmly at the top of the UK's professionalism around how we respond. We presented at CUF on a number of points. That's the Criminal Use of Firearms Conference just a couple of weeks ago. So the force is in a really strong position in terms of reducing workload. Staff stood on scenes, reduction of some 60 discharges in the space of a year from where we were 4 years ago is phenomenal, but more importantly, confidence and trust from the communities who are affected and blighted by this, not just the victims themselves, but the surrounding communities. It'll have a massive impact, we hope.
And I do think it's a really important slide, that, to demonstrate it, because obviously, you know, the events of last summer were just utterly heartbreaking, and I think we all recognise that one is too many, and you see the devastating results of it. But you know, I find myself constantly trying to challenge the narrative that Merseyside is just a city run by guns and gangs. And actually, when you look at that, the progress that has been made, we have come a long, long way in the last 10 years, and it is a very different place, notwithstanding last summer and the challenges that we still face. So I think it's a really positive story that, while there's more to do and making sure we sustain that, I think it's a really good story, and not just from police but partners as well. So yeah, I think it's really good. Okay, any other questions on the firearms? Yeah, John?
Basically, just my understanding what the definition of a discharge is, whether it's an unsuccessful attempt to injure or kill somebody, or whether it's anything, somebody testing a weapon or something like that.
Yeah, so it covers testing of weapons. It's basically any firearm that's firing a projectile. It doesn't include air weapons unless there's a certain poundage that it goes over. So if you're discharging a shotgun in a criminal act, or indeed a prohibited weapon, so a sawn-off shotgun, a machine pistol, as we've seen in this force on a number of occasions, unfortunately, or a handgun, then that would constitute, irrespective of what your intention is, that would constitute an offence that we would record.
Okay, thank you. If we move on then to county lines.
Fiona, are you going to talk through the detail, or do you want me to do this?
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, for the county lines, we saw, so 280 is the Merseyside target for 23 to 24, and that reduced from last year when the target was 400. And there's a number of reasons why it's reduced. The amount of work ongoing in the programme is vast, and the impact is not only measured in outcomes, the impact of it is not only measured in outcomes and line closures, there's also orders and disruptions, MDS investigations, not to mention the other 3 Ps, which are also difficult to measure. So.
Could you go on to the next slide, please, Fiona? Thank you. Okay, Commissioner, I was just going to talk through and pick out some high-level details. So, in terms of the county lines closed, the number actually isn't 194. To date now, it's 263, and you'll see there for the reason some of the positive indicators. One I really want to pull out is the toxic arrest to charge rate, which is 100%, and the toxic charge to conviction rate, which is also 100%. So in terms of the efficiency and effectiveness of the team and the work that they do, it is outstanding work, leading to 32 convictions and 118 weapons seized. You'll see high levels of intelligence submissions, which really help us build that intelligence picture in terms of understanding the picture of county lines, which then informs our work, and again, critical children and adult safeguards, it's 833, and that work with our partnerships. And I know we've touched on it again, civil orders applied for 13 in terms of really maximising our opportunities to use all our powers that are available to us to really robustly manage those individuals. The next slide just touches on some of the wider successes. So Operation Stonehaven This is our multi-agency partnership approach, where we work with over 60 internal and external partners, charities and third sector bodies. They have delivered primary, secondary and tertiary interventions and diversionary activities, and we've reached over 26,000 primary and secondary interventions delivered through Project Medusa funding, and 2,600 tertiary interventions with our communities. So in terms of the reach of that project, some really fantastic work. You will see 768 individuals have been referred to specialist providers for intensive targeted intervention, and we've introduced the Clear Whole Build strategy within 3 sites in force, known locally as Operation Evolve. And I think what's absolutely fantastic to see when we look at those areas, so taking Liverpool and Knowsley first, 76% increase of intelligence in the Evolve Liverpool location from August 2022 to August 2023. There's been a 16% increase in arrest in those areas and significant reductions in crime and antisocial behaviour. And we held the participatory budget event across the hall in June. Again, really working place-based with communities to build that community resilience and cohesion in support of the Clear Whole Build strategy. In terms of Sefton Park, the Park Lane estate, again, a similar initiative there with the participatory budget event, Power to Park Lane taking place, which saw £40,000 shared between 11 community groups. In terms of Wirral, Beechwood, Woodchurch and Noctorum, that launched in May 2023, and they've also had the participatory budget events, which saw £61,000 being made available. Funding for applications has just recently closed, so the successful bidders will be notified over the next couple of weeks, and we have future events planned for next year. But the other key point I really think is important to make generally in terms of Operation Evolve is the amount of information and intelligence that we are now receiving through Crime Stoppers from our communities. Merseyside has gone from being in a position where we wouldn't want to be in terms of low levels of Crime Stoppers intelligence through to being top nationally, which really demonstrates the confidence that communities are having in us and our ability to reach out, build those links and relationships and give us the information that we need, which is great news.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, I'm really positive to see. Did you want to ask a question?
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions. If we just go back to the first slide on this section, which is county lines, yeah, that's perfect. So I think I remember the first time that I found out that county lines, it was a physical thing. I was quite shocked. I just always presumed it was it was the line that people moved on. But to hear that, you know, when you close a county line, you're physically closing down an actual thing was quite a shock. So I think for any of the public watching, in terms of that chart there where you're showing the county lines that are closed, and then you've got those dots on other areas, can you explain what that means? Because I think it's a really good news story, so I think it's really good for the public to be able to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have basically lines to sell drugs. And we have internal county lines that operate inside the force boundary, but we are also a huge exporter of county lines where we will have criminality operating within the Merseyside footprint that then operates and moves to other areas of the UK, which is articulated on the map. So what we want to do is work with other police forces, because if we're exporting criminality, not only does that cause harm to our communities within the Merseyside footprint, but also that causes harm and can create disputes between organised crime groups. So part of the challenge with county lines, when you look purely upon the numbers, is sometimes you think, well, as quickly as we're closing those lines, more open. What I would say is criminals adapt. As quickly as we're closing lines down, new lines will open, and that's why focusing on that information and intelligence, building that evidential picture working right the way through the criminal justice system in terms of the sentences, and I go back to that 100% conviction and charge rate is really key, so that preventative messaging should be clear to people that if you are partaking in this activity, you are highly likely to be caught, you are highly likely to be convicted and serve a custodial sentence. And when particularly young people are being exploited into that arena because they're vulnerable, then getting that key messages into the schools, which is the Stonehaven through Project Medusa, about why certain individuals may be treating them in that way, to criminalise them, get them involved into crime, is really important so that we can prevent that criminality and stop involvement of children and young people in county lines. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it really does. And I think one of the most powerful things I heard when this was being explained to me was an officer said there's something about, you know, when a organised crime gang, when a member of that gang moves into another area, so it could be Wales or down south or in Plymouth or Devon, wherever, and there's something about their face when a Merseyside police officer turns up and knocks on the door that lets them know that actually you can't outrun us. We're gonna pursue you into other areas, and that's stuck with me since I heard it, and I was really impressed. So in terms of, and you did touch on it, and you said for every county line that you manage to close, that more pop up. So it sounds like you are literally fighting a really tough battle on this front. For everyone that you close down, how many open up?
I'm sorry, I don't have that detail. But what I would say is it links very much into the tackling serious and organised crime, because county lines is just part of our approach to tackling SOC. So all of the bits of the jigsaw puzzle that we've spoken about today go towards dismantling those organised crime groups who are involved in serious organised crime. Obviously, drugs and county lines is just one aspect of that, but it cuts right the way across. So for me, it is that relentless approach really to making sure that we are really robust around our intelligence gathering. Our communities are alive to the signs to look out for in terms of vulnerable people being exploited. Links back into the vulnerability training about our officers recognising that, and then our work with our partnerships and multi-agency safeguarding groups supported by the local authority to really have a robust approach along the 4 Ps.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on county lines? No? Happy? Okay, right. If we move on now then to modern slavery. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to take you through the next few slides. So modern slavery, they are on the graph. The crimes are represented by the blue bars and the solved outcomes are in red, with the solved outcome percentage as the green line. What you'll see is between April and September 23, there were 42 crimes of modern slavery compared with 94 in the same period the previous year, representing a 55% reduction or 52 less crimes. In terms of the solved outcome rate, for April 23 to September 23, it was 2.4%, and compared to the same periods of last year, which was 4.3%. In terms of overall numbers, we have a number of operations ongoing. Op Sanctuary and other investigations have possibly contributed to the reduction in numbers, albeit you can see they're not huge numbers across month by month. But we've also had, at our 12 Keys establishment, we've also had an immigration presence more recently, which we've not had before, allowing us to do arrests and stop checks in that area. We know that there is a correlation between the arrival of clandestines who arrive in the UK and the amount of crimes recorded in Merseyside. And as people are brought into the UK and they may be brought to Merseyside to stay in a hotel or other establishment, we know that any crimes that happen possibly in other countries are recorded as on Merseyside here, because that's their place where they've been the hotel or other establishment where they're staying. So we know that that does contribute to the numbers also. Do you want me to go through the next couple of slides? Then you can ask, just think conscious of time. By category, you can see there for the reading, again, the numbers are quite small, but we've had a reduction right across all of those types, with the exception of the increase from 0 to 1 on the second line, which is commit an offence other than kidnapping or false imprisonment, with the intention of arranging travel with a view to exploitation. And I'll just go on to the overall approach to modern slavery and human trafficking. So this slide highlights some of the key activities around modern slavery and human trafficking. As you can see there, our priorities are around intelligence gathering, our partnership activity and collaboration. There are a number of investigations ongoing, as you can see there. And in terms of that clandestine data, you can see that the large proportion of that pie chart is around the travel into, illegal travel into the UK. By boat is 44%, followed by walk-in, which is 28%, and then vehicle as 14%. There is governance, oversight and tasking in relation to modern slavery and human trafficking. Obviously, continuous improvement and learning is part of our approach, and all of our training, local policing and new recruits receive this training in terms of any new learning opportunities. And in terms of intelligence collection, obviously really key in this area. We want to make sure that we're working with our partners, the community. We've got the Modern Slavery Helpline and, you know, obviously open source information, which is what Mr. Kameen mentioned before. So that takes us to the end of the modern slavery information.
Okay, thanks for that. Jeannie, you've got questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple on this one. I suppose the first one would be, do we know why the number of incidents of modern slavery have gone down, that are being recorded have gone down? Because there's obviously more activity in that area, and we know that from the Modern Slavery Network and the conversations that we're having with wider partners. So I think that would be one of the first question. And then in terms of modern slavery by type, I was just wondering if you can kind of outline the police's strategy to tackle modern slavery, because obviously I know we've got a bit of information here on clandestine events data, is it? So percentage of mode of travel and different types, but actually there's not much around, you know, the fact that you can be involved in modern slavery as a British national, and the different types of modern slavery that you can end up involved in.
Deputy Commissioner, I will answer that. So in relation to the reduction in the number of incidents of modern slavery, Shelley touched on this before. We have seen a 200% drop in clandestines coming into the UK. That includes lorry drops, clandestine walk-ins, flights coming into the UK, particularly at Manchester Airport. And what we know is that a lot of our incidents and crimes are recorded about offences that take place outside of the UK. So an individual will come into the UK, come into Merseyside area, and then report that they are a victim of a crime that's taken place elsewhere. So in terms of our reduction in numbers, a lot of it can be attributed to a reduced number of individuals coming in terms of clandestines, and therefore the figures reflect that. What I would do is to reassure those listening and in the room that despite those offences taking place outside of the UK, we still record them. We record them on a system called N200, which is a police and Home Office recording system, which basically ensures that we capture, and we touched a bit on this a little earlier on with another crime type, that we capture the incident and the crime, even if Merseyside isn't going to then investigate it. Quite often what we'll see is that the crimes have been taking place in other European countries or elsewhere. So that is recorded when they come in and make themselves or make us aware of the issues that they have experienced. That largely reflects around labour exploitation or sexual exploitation. And then once it's recorded, we will determine where they originated from, and if it's a country that we can share information with, we will look at doing an ABE interview, achieving best evidence interview from them, and then share that information with that European partner to ensure that every opportunity around intelligence gathering, intelligence gap closing and investigations are taking place. If it is the case that we cannot share it with the originating host country, then we will look to work with a charity called Medill Trust, and they will look at any opportunities around doing that AB or capturing that intelligence. And then moving on, talking about the strategy to tackle modern slavery, as we've touched on, and Jen mentioned this a moment ago, there are a number of elements to this crime type. So Op Sanctuary, which is our modern slavery response, will deal with the adult victims of human trafficking, modern day slavery, and our operational response to intelligence and crime reports in relation to that crime type. Op Medusa and Op Toxic that Jen has just talked about will deal with that response around modern slavery human trafficking for county lines, which, as we've already talked about, can be internal within the force area or indeed external across the UK. And we've got that Home Office funding that we've already highlighted. And we also have, as we spoke about a little bit earlier on, the CSET team, which will also look at elements of modern slavery human trafficking within children, sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation as well, which obviously sits within our VORG PVP strand. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. That's fantastic, and it's great to hear the way that you are kind of approaching this, and that you are very much focused on supporting the victims out of modern slavery and pursuing the people who drag them into that. I don't think that's kind of, I would say, from PC's perspective and mine, that's where we very much feel that the direction of travel should be. A couple more questions, and I will be quick. And I know there are issues with the NRM, and I know that because of the Modern Slavery Network. So I kind of wanted to ask, do you know how many of the people are accepted that you are working with are accepted onto the NRM? And what happens to those that aren't? Because that is a real worry. Where do they end up? Where do they go? What kind of pressure does that cause for you? Because they've got to go somewhere. They've got to get support from somewhere. And I know you're working with Medial Trust, but it would be good to draw that out a little bit. And then in terms of slavery trafficking risk orders, are you using them at the moment, or would you consider using them?
Yes, thank you. So in relation to the NRM, if you're a victim under the age of 18, then you are automatically referred onto the NRM. If you're a victim over the age of 18, then you get an opportunity to choose whether or not you wish to enter that process. If you then do not enter the NRM process, so to go back to your point there around what happens to that group of individuals, then we complete a duty to notify, which is assessed then by the single competent authority, the SCA, and they make a decision then as to whether or not you're a victim and you need support services wrapped around it. So everybody is captured whether you make that admission around the NRM or not, and that is then recorded on police systems as well, so there's a corporate memory around it also. We do have some figures within the notes, so from the 1st of January 2023 to current date, we have 134 duty to notifies, 22 were based in Merseyside, 112 were overseas, which goes to show the stuff that we were talking about at the start around where our victims originate from and some of the reasons why our crimes or incidents have reduced. We've had 118 positive outcome NRMs, again 67 based in Merseyside and 51 overseas, and 91 negative outcome NRMs, 42 in Merseyside and 49 overseas. And of those 343 NRMs and DTNs made to Merseyside, 62% related to modern slavery crimes that occurred overseas. And of the 209 NRMs made in Merseyside, 52% occurred in the UK, and 61% of the UK-based NRMs had a positive outcome. In terms of that NRM process and the 5-day referral period, in Merseyside, I can report that more often than not, we don't require the 5 days in which to refer it. We usually progress that within 2 or 3 days. We have a dedicated persons at risk unit that will immediately support if that's the most appropriate means for that particular victim or individual. They will provide funding for food, essentials, as well as a hotel stay and a placement in a place of safety should that be required. If for any reason that isn't suitable, then we will work with our partner in terms of the Salvation Army to provide similar resourcing as well, very much focused around safeguarding and removing that individual from the concerning position that they find themselves.
Okay, thank you. And then last question from Bissy on this.
Yes, please. Thank you, Commissioner. My question is as regards the interpreter service. In 2019, Salvation Army warned that some of the human traffickers might be infiltrating the interpreter service with the aim of trying to re-traffic some of the victims. So do you think the interpreter service is still fit for purpose, and is it something that you still use from time to time? Thank you.
Thank you. So on speaking to our App Sanctuary team, who obviously deal with our modern slavery and human trafficking, they will highlight that the interpreter service is efficient and effective and really positive experience for them. They rely on them largely and very often can make contact with them and provide that service within a very short period of time. So in short, we are really comfortable that the service is effective.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to the last bit in this section, conscious of time, for economic crime. Thanks, Shirley.
Apologies. Okay, so the slide that you can see there is the number of economic crime fraud instances Merseyside. So between October 22 and October 23, there were 6,933 reports of economic crime with a reported loss of around £32.9 million. The breakdown shows how Action Fraud have grouped these offences together. So you can see there the consumer fraud, as you can see by the yellow bar, makes up the highest proportion of economic crime at just over 2,800 reports. And it goes back to the point earlier, which was around online shopping fraud, for example, in that category. Cyber-dependent crime averages between 500 and 600 crimes per month. And in terms of the monthly reporting volumes, you can see the graph within that. It shows March, July and August reporting higher than average levels. But the graph is there for the reading. I'll just carry on and then you come back to any questions. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this graph represents the breakdown of the top 10 fraud-related crimes between October 21 and October 22, and that's represented by the orange bar, compared to October 22 and 23, which is the blue bar. We've seen a decrease in the number of crimes involving cheque, plastic card and online bank accounts. So, for example, the first two sets of bars show that decrease. But we have seen increases in door-to-door sales, bogus tradespeople, application fraud and consumer phone fraud when compared to the same period last year. His Majesty's Government, have set a new objective of reducing fraud by 10%. Okay, in terms of individual victims' data, the slide shows that the data on individual victims showing the age range of victims and their gender. The top crime reported by individuals is online shopping and auction fraud, which falls under the banner of consumer fraud. And people between the ages of 20 and 49 are the main victims of fraud. Victim gender there would show men as 38%, women as 38% and 25% unknown. Happy to carry on? Okay, positive outcomes. These are the returns to the City of London Police who collate the positive outcomes for recorded crimes that have been finalised. Merseyside had a total of 1,014 outcomes for fraud cases, and of that, 185 positive outcomes, which equates to 18.4% proportion solved. And then just in terms of the Proceeds of Crime Act, which is the POCA Act, you can see there that in terms of cash seizures, the force has had £3.297 million of seized cash, which we get back 50% of that, so around £1.65 million returned to force. Confiscations equates to £1.76 million, of which we receive back about 18.75%. Around 328,000 will receive back, but the total remittance of those two come to just over £5 million. We've now got a proactive team established and they're actively reviewing the suspicious activity reports and obviously any opportunities for prevention and disruption of organised crime in those areas.
Great, thank you. It's always nice to see money being taken off criminals, which we welcome. John, do you want to ask your questions?
Yeah, I'm aware of time, so I'll put the two together. How well is action fraud working? And secondly, something that personally is interest to me is I've received a lot of texts, emails, phone calls, and the thing that concerns to me, it's very easy to say, no, I'm not interested, hang up, because you recognise that it's not something that you've actioned yourself. But you think, well, how can I report this? Is there anything being done to promote or to the mechanisms for reporting these near misses, should we call them?
Yes, thank you. In terms of what is being done to highlight the work of Action Fraud, there are lots of national campaigns ongoing. Earlier in the year we had Operation Hen House, which was all the police forces engaged with this, the National Crime Agency and the City of London Police, who lead on these campaigns as well, resulted in 290 arrests across the UK and more than £6.2 million in funding, in assets had been seized. Due to the success of that, Op Hen House will be rolled out again later in the year. So real positive advertising there around that. The website gives very clear direction around how you can report it, so everything gets reported into Action Fraud. They will then do a triage process around each of those reports and then feed that back out to the force. So just to give some figures around that, Shirley has talked about the fact that we had close to 7,000 reports or crimes that were committed in Merseyside. However, following that triage process, we only have about 870 to 900 that have then actually come back into the force for further consideration around investigation. So we recognise this is a high harm, high volume type of offence. Some 51% of crime is fraud related, so there's a significant challenge there, but I recognise that we've spoken about significant challenges throughout the afternoon as well. So there's lots of national work going on to raise awareness around this, and particularly in the prevention space in the first place. Locally, we do an awful lot in relation to this as well, going out into shopping centres to make sure that we are engaging with key people who we think are fit the crime trend in terms of victims, making sure that they have crime prevention advice given to them, and that's proved really successful and really popular as well.
Okay, thank you. Right, if we move on now then on to complaints. I think we've got a slide for complaints. Is Fiona, are you talking through this?
Yeah, I'll take you through the complaints slide, Commissioner. So the graph here shows the last 18 months of finalised complaints as consistent. So the reason we use finalised complaints is just simply for volume accuracy. So it shows you, or it should show you, that the majority of complaints assessed are non-Schedule 3, so they would be our less serious type of complaints, and there are fewer complaints that are categorised as Schedule 3, so that's more serious. So in total, 3,531 finalised complaints have been recorded in the last 3 months. In the last 18 months. Sorry. And then just to talk in a little bit more detail around the common themes. So the most common themes that are around dissatisfaction that relate to investigation outcomes, use of force, stop and search, and return of property. And then in terms of those more serious Schedule 3 complaints, we have recorded 13 cases that have been converted from Schedule 3 complaints that have led to misconduct proceedings over the last 12 months. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bissy, that was yours.
Thank you, Commissioner. Please, can you provide a breakdown of the ethnicity of the individuals who make these complaints, and also the officers who these complaints are against? And have you noticed a pattern of disproportionality? Thank you.
Yeah, so complaint data and volume is monitored, recorded and analysed in the bi-monthly performance meeting, and that includes a section for the police race action plan. So in general, the majority of volume complainants are white and low volume for minority ethnic groups. Included within the section for the police race action plan is also a slide for disparity to breakdown of complaints. for all complaints finalised with a known ethnicity. And recent performance data for October and November outlines the volume of finalised complaints, so as 313, that relates to the volume of complainants with a known ethnicity. And of the 313 volume complaints, 27 relate to a minority ethnic group, and 10 of those are black people, so the volume is quite low, but there's some slight disproportionality there, but the figures are so low that it makes that assessment quite difficult.
Thanks, Fiona. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to add specifically to Bishy's question in relation to the ethnicity of the officer or member of staff that the complaint is made against. So this is work that is ongoing, both from a national perspective as well as locally. So perhaps we can bring back some of that data at a future meeting. It's not something that we routinely always captured, but clearly it's work that's being done that Jen's aware of.
Yeah, and just to add, I think a note of caution, particularly in relation to the makeup of our staff. Sometimes, because of the low proportions of numbers, it would expose officers or staff, dependent upon whether it was a misconduct allegation that had been heard within the public domain. So slight note of caution around some of those figures, but certainly something that we may be able to brief on separately. But as the DEP said, that work is ongoing within professional standards.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you for that. Okay, right. Next one then, finance. Keith, you patiently wait to talk us through how much money we've got.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. So I'll keep this brief. The slides are there for the reading. We're in a good position come the half-year view. So overall, if you exclude the ROCU, we're at 1.8 million underspent. And so we'll continue to be cautious on that. We've also ring-fenced, and we called it the earmarked for the uplift funds. So we keep that until we can evidence that it's actually required. So we continue to use that prudently, but we will know as we move into next year that that'll be required to support the further rollout of Operation Uplift. And then just on capital, we don't expect to utilise all that capital allowance for the estates in particular, because of some delays in just getting the estate strategy signed off, but that means that the funds will just roll into next year as we move through that 12-year strategy.
Okay, great. Any questions or anything, John, you want to add? No? Do we want to reflect anything on about the policing settlement, or is there anything we want to add to comment on that at this point? No? No, we'll come back to it. Okay. Okay, thank you, Keith, for that. Right, the last bit then is public questions. So this, as colleagues will be aware, we invite members of the public to submit questions for us to put to yourselves. So there's three that I'll just run through, and obviously I think we can also write out answers as well, but if you just give us a brief answer, I'd be grateful. So the first question was around what work is being done to prevent the increasing number of officers applying to transfer to other forces on promotion. The second question then was around work the Merseyside Police is doing to promote student safety and working with universities. And then the third question was around ensuring a consistent response to tackling antisocial behaviour, and there was a particular highlight around a perception of a difference of response around Walton versus what happened in Picton and Wavertree, and is there a consistent response to those issues? So who's going to...
Commissioner, do you want me to take the first question in relation to transferees applying to other forces on promotion? So I think, first of all, it's really important to consider this in the overall context when answering this question. Merseyside have had more transferees in over the past 12 months than have left. So we had 25 in last year, but only 16 out, so a net gain of 9. And interestingly, we've still got 29 constables and 12 sergeant transferees currently being processed through People Services at the moment. So we are an attractive force for people coming in rather than people leaving us. We've also got one of the best retention rates or the best retention rate out of 43 forces. And like other forces, we're complying with the College of Policing guidelines from around 2017 regarding opening up our promotion processes, which means that we can bring talent in, as well as our talent applying for other forces as well. And I think that's really positive for policing. A number of us sat here have worked in other forces and come back. And as a result, we have made our processes for people who want to come back, and we have had a number much easier and much slicker as well. So I think it's a really positive picture. We do monitor other forces in our region when their promotion processes are on. And so, for example, we did bring one of our superintendent's processes forward so that people had certainty around whether or not they would be able to be promoted in Merseyside before applying elsewhere. And that's worked really successfully. So we do that forward planning, and we are agile when we need to be as a force. Obviously, we've got the leadership programme of work in place as well, which is developing leaders at all levels, so ensuring that we're looking at succession planning effectively for future promotion processes, but also developing our future talent as well. And finally, we completed work with the National Retention Lead, and Merseyside presented our work to the National Retention Conference held recently in Manchester, sharing some of the good practice there with other forces around how we're implementing the National Leavers Framework here, doing those exit interviews and making sure that we're sharing that learning across the force. So lots being done and lots more to be done moving forwards in relation to that, but a positive picture.
Great, thank you. Jen, are you taking this?
Thanks, Commissioner. Yes, so in terms of the question about what are we doing to protect students and promote student safety, and are we working with the universities? Absolutely. So we have 2 university officers that link in with the universities and work closely with housing, the local policing teams and our targeted staff, and have really built a good rapport with students due to their presence within the campus. I'm sure you cited, we have Operation Freshers, which focuses predominantly on multi-agency nighttime economy matters. And then we also have a focused piece of work around the residential areas of Smithdown area, with some planned activity around prevention, how to report, intervention, some preventative messages around noise and antisocial behaviour, student safety and advice on home safety. We have had some great support from partners from community safety teams to really help us work as a cohesive group to support students. And as part of listening to student voice, we have the student safety group meeting, which is scheduled to take place 4 times a year. Listens to the needs of students, but also allows that vital exchange of information, particularly around student safety and crime types that can affect our students, including acquisitive crime, violence and sexual violence. And again, key to the design out crime element, given that community crime prevention advice to keep our students safe in the city.
Great, thank you.
And then the last one will also be me. So the disparity in the response received by residents in different areas of Liverpool, with particular reference to Woolton and the dispersal zone, Commissioner. So clearly officers will use a problem-solving approach when tackling antisocial behaviour, and will consider all options available to them to address the specific issue. However, not all options are suitable for every issue. And in the example listed in the question, the issues that we saw in Woolton were attributed to large groups of youths, many of which who were gathering did not live within the local area, and therefore the Section 34 dispersal notice really allowed officers to use that power to disperse those youths effectively from the area where they were committing the antisocial behaviour. Neighbourhood officers will always work alongside our local partners and communities to really understand the issues and develop bespoke problem-solving packages based upon the OSARA model, rather. And clearly, using dispersal order powers wouldn't be appropriate in every circumstance, and we need to make sure that when they are used, they're used proportionately. Just as a note of reassurance, really, our officers have had the full range of training around the options that are available to them when tackling ASB, and are supported by tactical advisors within the problem-orientated policing team, with that real focus upon place.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. I'm covering this last bit. So that's the end of the agenda. I've not been notified of any other business. It's just to say that the date of our next meeting is going to be Monday the 11th of March. It says 23, but of course it'll be 24. Have a good Christmas and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you.